The Marine grabbed her arm and laughed. "Relax, sweetheart. We're just talking." Maya Collins didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She looked at his hand on her sleeve the way a surgeon looks at a problem, clinical, unhurried, already solved. Then she looked up at him. Not with fear, not with anger, with something far worse. Recognition. Like she had already calculated exactly how this ended. The Marine was still smiling when the floor came up to meet him. If you're watching this right now, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and stay with me until the very end. You don't want to miss what comes next. The night shift at Redstone Maritime Training Facility had a particular kind of quiet to it. The kind that settles over a place when the work is real and the people doing it are serious. Somewhere across the compound, heavy equipment hummed through loading bays. Radios clicked and went silent. Boots on concrete moved with purpose, and then disappeared into rooms that didn't advertise their business. Inside Storage Operations Building 4. Lieutenant Maya Collins stood alone at a long metal table covered in binders, clipboards, and mission equipment manifests. The overhead fluorescents were too bright and too cold. The room smelled like oil canvas and industrial cleaner. She had been there since 2100 hours, working methodically through a pre-exercise equipment audit that nobody else wanted to do, and that nobody upstairs would remember unless something was wrong. She wasn't bothered by that. She preferred it, actually. Maya was 34 years old with a quiet face and steady eyes and a way of carrying herself that didn't announce anything. She wore a standard-issue Navy uniform. No command patch. No rank display beyond her lieutenant's insignia. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, so unremarkable that most people who passed her in a hallway forgot her before they reached the end of it. She looked to anyone paying casual attention like a woman who spent her career managing paperwork and staying out of the way. That impression had saved her life more times than she could count. She pulled a serial number from the manifest and cross-checked it against the tag on a hard-shell equipment case stacked against the wall. Her pen moved. Her eyes moved. Her mind was doing three things at once, cataloging the discrepancy she'd found in the previous item, tracking the time, and listening to the building. She always listened to the building. It was a habit so deeply embedded, she no longer thought of it as a habit. It was simply how she existed in any space. The way sound moved through a room told you things. The weight of footsteps told you things. The difference between someone walking toward something and someone walking toward you, that difference was measurable, and Maya Collins had spent years measuring it in environments where getting it wrong meant you didn't come home. She heard the door before it opened. 4 sets of boots. Moving loosely. Not in formation, more like a pack that had been together long enough to drift into sync without thinking about it. Tired, but not quiet tired. The kind of tired that looks for something to push against. She didn't look up. The door opened. Huh. The voice was male, unhurried, carrying the particular confidence of someone who expected the room to rearrange itself around him. Didn't think anyone was still in here. Maya kept her eyes on the manifest. Inventory audit, she said. I'll be another hour. There was a beat of silence. Then the sound of the group fanning slightly the unconscious choreography of men, deciding whether a situation is interesting. Inventory audit, another voice repeated. A different register. Younger. The edge in it was sharper, less settled. For the Joint X equipment. Yes. That's not a logistics function. That's a special operations pre-clearance protocol. Maya looked up then. Not because she was challenged. Because she wanted to see exactly who she was dealing with. 4 Marines. All male. All built the way. Serious training builds a person. Dense muscle, good posture. The particular stillness of bodies that know what they're capable of. Their uniforms were regulation, but had the casual wear of a long day on them. They'd been running drills. Hard ones, probably. She could read the specific fatigue in the way 2 of them stood, shoulders dropped slightly forward, weight on the back foot. The kind of tiredness that comes from hours of tactical movement, not desk work. She recognized the type immediately. Not bad men. Not even probably men who thought of themselves as doing anything wrong. Just men who were very good at a particular set of things and had started gradually and almost invisibly to confuse that competence with permission. "I'm cleared for it," Maya said simply, and looked back at the manifest. She heard one of them shift his weight, then another. The small sounds of a group recalibrating. "Your logistics," the first voice said. It wasn't quite a question. It was the kind of statement that waits for you to argue with it. "Supply and operations coordination," Maya said without looking up. "Lieutenant Collins, my credentials are on file with the base duty officer if you need to verify." "We don't need to verify anything." The voice moved closer. "We just want to know why a supply officer is running pre-clearance checks on equipment that's designated for Tier 1 operations." Maya put her pen down. Not dramatically. She simply set it parallel to the edge of the clipboard and straightened the manifests into a neat stack. Then she looked up again. All four of them were closer now. Not in a way that would show up clearly on a security camera. Not in a way that was overtly threatening. Just closer. The way you crowd a space when you want someone to feel the edges of it. "Because," she said evenly, "I was assigned to. Is there something I can help you with, or are you here to verify the equipment yourselves?" The one who'd spoken first, she was already cataloging him as the primary. The one the others oriented toward smiled. It was the kind of smile that had probably worked well for him most of his life. Easy, confident, slightly condescending in a way that could always be explained away as charm. "We're here because we just finished a 12-hour field rotation, and we need to pull 2 cases from this building for transport." "Case numbers." He looked at her for a long moment. "You asking us for paperwork now?" "I'm asking for the case numbers so I can locate the items and log the transfer," Maya said. "That's how this works." Something shifted in the group. A small tightening. She felt it more than saw it. "You know," the second Marine said, and his voice had a different quality. Now the pleasantness stretched thin over something harder. "It's a little strange. I've been through this building maybe 30 times in the last 2 years. Never seen a logistics officer running night audits on Tier 1 gear." "Then you've been lucky," Maya said. "There are usually 3 of us. Tonight, I'm it." "You come alone to a building like this, middle of the night." He paused. "That takes confidence. Or it takes a duty assignment," she said. "Which this is." The third Marine laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. "She's something." Maya noted the shift in pronoun. She. Not lieutenant. Not ma'am. She. The grammatical choice of someone who had decided a person didn't require professional address. She picked up her pen. "Gentlemen, if you have case numbers, I'll log the transfer and you can be on your way. If not, I'll need to ask you to wait in the corridor until I finish this section of the audit." "Ask us," the first Marine said, and now he was smiling again. "You're going to ask us?" "Yes." "You're a logistics officer. We're operators fresh off a classified rotation, and you're going to ask us to wait in the corridor." "I am," Maya said. "Because this is my building for the next hour, and the equipment in it is my responsibility. So yes, I'm asking." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it. She could feel all 4 of them deciding something. The primary Marine exchanged a glance with the one on his left, a fast, sidelong thing that communicated more than words. Then the primary moved. Not toward her, just around the table. A casual repositioning. He stopped about 6 feet to her right and leaned against a shelving unit, crossing his arms. "So tell me something," he said. "What does logistics training actually involve? Because I've gone through BUDS, a combat deployment, and a JTAC certification. I've never once been assigned a room and told to wait in the corridor by someone who manages inventory." "First time for everything," Maya said. The Marine on her left moved, slightly, an inch or 2 closer. "We're not trying to make this difficult," the fourth Marine said. He had a softer voice than the others, not a gentle person, but a strategic one. The kind who understood that the most effective pressure doesn't always announce itself. "We just need our equipment, you understand?" "Case numbers," Maya said again. Her voice didn't change. "Here's what I'm having trouble with," the primary Marine said, uncrossing his arms and straightening up. I've done 3 tours, 2 of those in environments that would make your audits look like a picnic. And I'm standing in a base storage facility at midnight being told to wait in the corridor by someone who... Who what? Maya asked. He stopped. Go ahead, she said. Finish it. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in her voice had changed, not volume, not temperature exactly, but weight. Like a door that had been standing open had just shifted almost imperceptibly on its hinges. By someone who looks like they don't belong here, he finished. But the confidence in it was slightly different now, flatter. I see, Maya said. She set the clipboard down. You've done 3 tours, she said. That's real. That matters. I'm not dismissing what that cost you or what it means. She paused. But right now you're standing in a building where you don't have a current authorization handling a conversation that's starting to cross a line you don't want to cross. And I'm telling you that as professionally as I know how to. Is that a threat? The second Marine asked. It's information, she said. What you do with it is up to you. The primary Marine was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed off the shelving unit and walked toward the table. Not fast, deliberately. You want to know what I think? He stopped across from her, the table between them. I think someone assigned you here because they needed a body in the room and nobody better was available. I think you're uncomfortable and you're covering it with this whole... He gestured vaguely at her, this whole calm thing. And I think if we went and found whoever is actually in charge of this audit, they'd look a lot different from you. Maya looked at him for a moment. You think I'm performing calm? She asked. I think you're working very hard to seem unbothered. No, she said quietly. I'm not working at all. That's the difference. He didn't have an answer for that immediately. And into that small silence, she continued. I'm going to ask one more time. Case numbers. Or you wait in the corridor. Those are the options. The primary Marine looked at his team. Something passed between them in the wordless language of people who have trained together long enough to think in partial sentences. Then he turned back to her. And he took one more step forward. Here's the thing about options, he said. They only work if the other person has them. The third Marine was already moving to her left. The fourth had drifted toward the door. The primary and the secondary closed the distance from the front. Maya didn't move backward. She was standing at the center of the table, and she was doing what she had been doing in various forms for more years than any of these 4 men knew. She was reading the geometry of the situation, the angles, the spacing, the weight distribution of every person in the room. She was mapping exit points and engagement distances and the precise order in which things would need to happen. She wasn't afraid. She was calibrating. Last chance, she said. And her voice was so quiet that the primary Marine had to lean slightly forward to catch it. Last chance for what? He asked. To make a different choice. He laughed. Short, dismissive, disbelieving. He looked back at the others, and the look on his face was the specific expression of a man who has decided that something is beneath his concern. Then he looked back at her. You don't even know what you're in the middle of, he said. Yes, Maya said softly. I do. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Mercer saw it on the security monitor from the adjacent corridor. He had been doing a routine walk of the facility when the feed from Building 4 caught his eye. Not because anything dramatic had happened yet, but because something about the posture of the woman at the table made him stop. He'd been in the military for 22 years. He'd seen hundreds of confrontations. What he understood intuitively before he could articulate it was that the positioning in that room was wrong. Not wrong as in dangerous to the building. Wrong as in the 4 people who thought they were controlling the situation had fundamentally misread it. He pressed the intercom for the adjacent corridor. Mercer here. Get me Captain Blake. Tell him to come to the monitor station at Building 4, now. Captain Aaron Blake arrived 90 seconds later, slightly breathless. He looked at the screen. 4 Marines, 1 woman. The numbers, the posture, the layout, everything read as a clear asymmetry. Should we go in? Blake asked. Mercer didn't answer immediately. He was watching Maya. She hadn't stepped back. In all the repositioning and all the moments where the natural human response to that kind of encirclement was to give ground, she hadn't moved. She's choosing where they stand. Mercer said quietly. Blake looked at him. What does that mean? It means she's not reacting to them. Mercer's voice was careful, deliberate. They think they're boxing her in. She's letting them place themselves exactly where she wants them. He paused. That's not a defensive position. That's a setup. Blake looked at the screen again. At the calm, still figure at the center of the table. At the 4 trained operators who were moving with the confidence of men who had never once considered that they might be the ones walking into something. Who is she? Blake asked. Mercer was already reaching for his radio. That, he said, is what I'm trying to find out. Back inside the room. The primary Marine said something that was meant to be the final word. Maya heard it. She registered it. She let it pass through the air between them and settle into the silence. Then the secondary Marine reached out and closed his hand around her forearm. Not a grab exactly. Not a deliberate assault. But firm. Intentional. The physical expression of a conversation that had gone past the point where words seemed necessary. Relax, he said, and smiled. We're just talking. Maya looked down at his hand. Then she looked up. Let go, she said. The word was singular. Flat. It had no threat in it and no fear. It was the voice of someone issuing a technical instruction, the way you'd say, check the gauge or clear the chamber. Specific. Final. Or what? The primary asked. Half laughing. Genuinely amused. The room was still laughing when Maya moved. She didn't announce it. She didn't wind up. She simply moved a precise economical shift of weight and angle that used the grip on her arm not as a constraint, but as a fulcrum. The secondary Marine felt the world tilt before he understood why. His balance, which he'd spent years refining, simply wasn't there when he reached for it. The floor arrived faster than physics seemed to explain. He sat down hard. The third Marine moved on instinct forward and aggressive the way trained people move when a teammate goes down. Maya didn't retreat. She stepped into the movement, redirected it at the elbow, and walked him gently but irresistibly into the side of the shelving unit. He didn't fall. He stopped. Comprehensively. The primary Marine stared. For exactly 1 second the room was completely still. Then his expression changed. Not to anger. To something much more useful. Understanding. Maya stood where she'd been standing from the beginning at the center of the table, weight-balanced hands at her sides. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken a sweat. She was looking at all 4 of them with the same expression she'd worn all night. And it occurred to the primary Marine in a way it hadn't before, that this expression wasn't patience. It was assessment. She'd been assessing them since the moment they walked in. You want to try the next one, she said, and her voice was still perfectly quiet. Or are we done? The 4th Marine by the door didn't move. The 3rd by the shelving unit didn't move. The primary Marine stared at her for a long moment, and in his face, you could see the machinery of assumption grinding against something it couldn't process. Who are you? He said finally. And Maya said, that's the first useful question you've asked all night. Outside at the monitor station, Chief Warrant Officer Mercer was on the radio. He'd seen the 38-second sequence on the screen, and he was already submitting a personnel verification request for Lieutenant Maya Collins, Logistics Division, Redstone Facility Assignment. He submitted it through standard channels. The response came back flagged. Restricted access. Classification level above his clearance tier. He looked at Captain Blake. Blake looked at the screen where Maya Collins was already back at her table, picking up her pen, straightening her manifest, continuing the inventory audit, as if the last 40 seconds had been a minor administrative interruption. I need to make a call, Mercer said. To who? Mercer was already dialing. Someone who has the clearance I don't. Inside the building. Maya found the serial number she'd been looking for before the interruption, checked it against the tag on the equipment case, made a notation in the margin, and moved to the next item on the list. The primary Marine was still standing across the table from her. You should sit down, she said without looking up. Someone's coming. And when they get here, you're going to want to look like you made a reasonable choice. He didn't sit. But he didn't move either. What just happened? He asked. Maya made another notation. You walked into a building without authorization, she said. You attempted to intimidate a fellow service member in the performance of her duties. And when that didn't work, one of your team initiated physical contact. She looked up. What happened is that you made a series of decisions, and now you're going to live with them. Who are you? He asked again. Quieter this time, with a different quality to it. She looked at him steadily. I'm the officer whose room you walked into, she said. And for tonight, that's all you need to know. She looked back at the manifest, and she kept working. The door at the far end of the corridor opened at 0147 hours. Mercer came through it first, followed by Blake, followed by two senior NCOs who had been roused from the duty station by a radio call they weren't going to explain until they saw what they were walking into. They stopped just inside the doorway. The four Marines. Maya at the table, the manifest in her hands. Mercer's eyes moved across the room and took inventory the way experienced officers do, not just what was visible, but what was present in the air. The way two of the Marines were standing, the specific quality of the silence. He looked at Maya. She looked at him. Lieutenant Collins, he said carefully, is everything in order? She considered the question with the same attention she gave to everything. The audit is approximately 45% complete, she said. I've found two discrepancies in the case number logs that will need to be flagged for command review. Other than that, she set the clipboard down and looked at the four Marines. I think these gentlemen were just leaving. The primary Marine opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't, he started. They were just leaving, Maya said again. Her voice had the quality of a decision that had already been made. Mercer held the door. The four Marines left, and Maya turned back to her manifest, found her place in the column of numbers and serial codes, and continued where she had left off. Mercer waited until the corridor was quiet. Then he said quietly, so that only she could hear, I submitted a verification request. Maya made a notation. I know, she said. The clearance came back restricted. I know that too. Mercer was quiet for a moment. He looked at the small mark on her wrist, a detail he hadn't registered consciously until now, a faint identifying tattoo standard issue for a community he knew only by reputation. Ma'am, he said slowly, how long have you been assigned here? 6 weeks, she said. And before that? She looked up at him. Her expression was pleasant, professional, absolutely unreadable. Before that, she said, is classified. She turned back to the manifest, and Mercer stood in the doorway of Building 4 at 2 in the morning, holding a radio with a restricted access return on his screen, and began to understand with increasing and somewhat unsettling clarity that the quiet woman with the clipboard had been the most dangerous person in this facility for the entire 6 weeks she'd been assigned here. Nobody had known. Nobody apparently was supposed to know, and that he was just beginning to realize was entirely by design. Mercer didn't sleep that night. I went back to his office, pulled up what he could on the internal system, and sat there staring at a screen that kept returning the same 2 words every time he pushed past a certain depth in Lieutenant Maya Collins's file, access denied. It wasn't the denial itself that bothered him, he'd hit classified walls before. It was the level of the denial. Standard restricted files carried a single flag. This one had 3, stacked, each one requiring a clearance tier higher than the last. The kind of layered protection you built around information that wasn't just sensitive, but operationally active. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. 22 years. He'd processed personnel files for operators, analysts, combat advisors, intelligence attachés. He knew what a protected file looked like when someone was currently running something. The layers weren't archival protection. They were live. Maya Collins wasn't a logistics officer on administrative assignment, or rather she was. Exactly that. Down to the paperwork, the duty roster, the base housing assignment, the requisition forms she'd filed in week 1 about a broken supply cabinet in her office that had never been repaired. All of it was real. All of it was documented. And all of it was, he was beginning to understand a construction so thorough it had fooled everyone on this base for 6 weeks. He picked up his phone at Yo 315 hours and called Blake. "You sleeping?" he asked. "Was," Blake said. "I need you to pull the duty rosters for the last 6 weeks. Every scheduled inspection, every equipment review, every audit that touched Tier 1 materials." A pause. "That's a long list." "I know. Look for Collins on every one of them." Another pause. Longer. "Mercer." Blake's voice was careful. "What exactly are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Mercer said slowly, "that she didn't get assigned here to count boxes." He hung up. 8:06:30. Maya was in the base cafeteria eating eggs and reading a document that looked like a maintenance schedule. She had her coffee on the left side of the tray, her folder on the right, and the expression of someone with a full day ahead and a reasonable plan for it. She didn't look like someone who had been involved in a physical confrontation 8 hours earlier. She didn't look like someone who had submitted an incident report at 0200 and then returned to finish an inventory audit. She was only halfway through. She looked entirely and convincingly like a logistics officer on a Tuesday morning. Captain Aaron Blake slid his tray across from her without asking. Maya glanced up, looked at him, looked back at her document. "Captain," she said. "Lieutenant." He sat down. He had a coffee and nothing else, which meant he hadn't been thinking about food. He was thinking about the conversation he was about to have. "You filed the incident report yourself?" "I did." "At 2 in the morning. The incident occurred at 2 in the morning. The report needs to be filed within 4 hours of the event." She turned a page. "I filed it at 0213. That's within 4 hours." Blake wrapped both hands around his coffee. "They're talking about you," he said. "The Marines. I don't know exactly what they're saying, but the duty NCO mentioned that Sergeant Holloway came to him at 0500 asking questions." Maya looked up. "What kind of questions?" "About you, your assignment, your record." Blake paused. "Whether you had a prior military record under a different designation." Maya was quiet for a moment. She picked up her coffee. "What did the duty NCO tell him?" she asked. "What's in your file? Supply and operations coordination, naval logistics, Redstone assignment 6 weeks." Blake's eyes were steady on her. "That's it. That's all that came back." "Good," Maya said. "Is it?" Blake asked. "Because Sergeant Holloway is not a stupid man, Lieutenant. He knows what it means when a woman puts 2 of his people on the floor in 38 seconds and then goes back to counting serial numbers." Maya set her coffee down. 34 seconds, she said. Blake stared at her. "It was 34 seconds, she said. "Not 38. She looked at him evenly. "Not that it matters." Blake was quiet for a long moment. Then he said in a lower voice, "Who are you?" "I'm Lieutenant Maya Collins," she said. "Naval Logistics Supply and Operations Coordination." She closed her folder. "That's what my file says." "Your file has 3 access flags on it." "Then you know more than most people," she said pleasantly, and picked up her tray. "Collins." He said it with enough weight that she paused. "Those Marines are going to push back. Holloway won't let this sit. If there's something going on at this facility that's bigger than a routine audit, then that's a conversation for people with the appropriate clearance," she said. She looked at him carefully, not unkindly, but with the specific precision of someone drawing a line. "You're a good officer, Captain. You saw something last night and you responded correctly. I'm noting that in the report." She picked up her folder. "Leave the rest of it alone." She walked her tray to the return window, set it down, and left the cafeteria without looking back. Blake sat there for a minute, staring at the door she'd walked through. Then he pulled out his phone and called Mercer. "She just told me to leave it alone," he said. "I know," Mercer said. "What does that mean?" "It means she knows we're looking, and she's not worried about it." A pause. "Which tells you something about what she actually has backing her up." Sergeant First Class David Holloway was the kind of Marine who had built his career on a very specific understanding of how institutions worked. You protected your people. You controlled information. You managed problems internally before they became external. 20 years of service had taught him that the military's greatest strength wasn't firepower. It was the ability to process inconvenient events and produce acceptable narratives. Last night had been an inconvenient event. He sat across from his 4 Marines in a small conference room that smelled like whiteboard cleaner and said absolutely nothing for the first 30 seconds. Just looked at them, one by one. Sergeant Marcus Webb, the primary. Corporal James Reese, the secondary, the one who'd grabbed her arm. Lance Corporal Torres and Lance Corporal Park. All 4 of them looked like men who hadn't slept. "Tell me," Holloway said finally, "what exactly you thought you were doing?" Webb answered, because Webb was always the one who answered. "We were retrieving equipment for the morning rotation, Sergeant. The building was occupied. We identified the occupant and attempted to verify her authorization." "Attempted," Holloway repeated. "She was uncooperative." "She was doing a classified pre-clearance audit," Holloway said. "That's not uncooperative. That's her job." "We didn't know that." "You could have asked." "We did ask." "You asked what she was doing in a room with Tier 1 equipment," Holloway said. "That's different from asking for her authorization. One is a professional inquiry. The other is," he paused, "the other is what went into the incident report." Reese shifted in his seat. "Sergeant, she—" "Don't," Holloway said. Flat, final. Reese closed his mouth. "The report has already been reviewed by the duty officer and escalated to command," Holloway said. "That means it's not mine to manage anymore. It went up the chain at 0600 this morning, which means by now someone in a building I don't have access to has read a description of what happened in that storage facility last night." He looked at each of them in turn. "And they're deciding what to do about it." Webb sat forward slightly. "We can explain." "You already did," Holloway said. "The report has your account and hers, both of them. And right now I want you to understand something." He leaned forward. "Her account is 3 paragraphs long. It uses no emotional language. It includes timestamps, equipment numbers, and a verbatim record of the exchange. It reads like a technical document." He looked at Webb. "Yours reads like a man trying to explain why something wasn't his fault." Silence. "What I need to know," Holloway said, his voice dropping, "is whether any of you recognized her." Webb frowned. "Recognized her?" "From anywhere. Any previous assignment. Any training pipeline. Any name list." Webb shook his head. The others followed. Holloway drummed his fingers once on the table. "I submitted a background query on Lieutenant Maya Collins this morning through our intelligence liaison. Do you know what came back?" Nobody answered. 3 flags and a contact number for an office I've never called before," Holloway said. "I called it." He paused. "Whoever answered told me that the personnel information I was requesting was unavailable at my clearance level, and that any further inquiries should be submitted in writing through the appropriate chain of command." Another pause. "Then they thanked me for my service and hung up." Reese stared at him. "What does that mean?" Holloway was quiet for a moment. "It means," he said carefully, "that the woman you cornered in a storage building last night is not who her file says she is." He looked at each of them again. "And I want each of you to think very carefully about what that means for how you conduct yourselves going forward." Maya was back in Building 4 at 0900. She had the second half of the manifest to complete and a discrepancy follow-up to file before noon. She worked steadily, moving through the equipment bays with the same quiet attention she'd brought to everything at Redstone for 6 weeks. She checked. She logged. She noted what was missing and what was present in the wrong place, and what had identification numbers that didn't match the master list. There were more discrepancies than the audit had been designed to find. That was the thing about a genuine logistics audit. The gaps told a story. Not just this item is missing, but this item was removed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and how to make the removal look like a clerical error. You needed a specific kind of eye for it. The eye of someone who understood not just inventory protocol, but the psychology of concealment. How someone thinks when they're hiding something. What they cover first. Where they get lazy. Maya had spent years learning that psychology in environments where the thing being concealed wasn't equipment. She marked her 7th discrepancy and paused. Pulled out her phone. No signal in the building. The facility ran signal suppression in the storage areas for security reasons. She walked to the doorway, stepped into the corridor, checked the signal. 1 bar. Enough. She sent a text to a number that wasn't stored under any name. 4 words. Pattern is confirmed. Accelerating. She put the phone back in her pocket and returned to the audit. At 10:45, a woman she had never seen before walked through the door. She was mid-50s, civilian clothes that had the particular formlessness of someone who'd stopped caring about fashion sometime around the turn of the century. No badge visible. No identification. She carried a paper cup of coffee that looked like it came from the cafeteria, and she walked with the unhurried certainty of someone who had clearance to be in any room they chose to enter. She stopped about 10 feet from Maya. "Nice facility," she said, looking around. "It gets the job done," Maya said without looking up. "You're 3 items behind where the timeline projected." Maya looked up. The woman was looking at her with calm, intelligent eyes. Late 50s. A face that had seen a very large number of rooms like this one over a very long career. 2 of the discrepancies required physical verification before I could log them, Maya said. The cases had been moved from their registered positions by approximately 4 meters, enough to change the sector code. Someone who knew what they were doing. The woman sipped her coffee. "How many total?" 7 confirmed. "I think there are more in the Eastern Bay that I haven't reached yet." "Timeline still viable?" "Yes." Maya looked at her steadily. "If the operations room doesn't start asking questions that complicate the access." "The operations room," the woman said, "had a conversation with an intelligence officer this morning that they won't be repeating. The matter has been redirected." She paused. "The incident last night was handled," Maya said. "I know it was handled. I read the report." Something moved briefly in the woman's expression, not quite amusement, not quite approval. 34 seconds. "I was being careful," Maya said. "They're not bad soldiers." "No, they're not." The woman looked at the manifest in Maya's hand. 3 flags on the file wasn't subtle enough, apparently. Captain Blake and Warrant Officer Mercer both submitted additional queries this morning. "I know. Blake told me directly." The woman raised an eyebrow. "He told you." "He sat down across from me at breakfast and asked who I was." Maya paused. "He's smart. He's also principled. He's not going to cause problems. He just wants to know that someone legitimate is running something legitimate." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him to leave it alone." "Did he?" "No," Maya said. "But he will." She looked at the woman. "He'll keep looking at the edges, but he won't cross the line. He knows where the line is." The woman was quiet for a moment. "There's a development," she said. Maya set the manifest down. "Holloway submitted a query through the intelligence liaison," the woman continued. "Standard background verification. It came back flagged as it should. But the query itself, the fact that it was submitted, was logged. And the log was accessed this morning by someone who is not Holloway, and who does not have an obvious reason to be monitoring Holloway's administrative activity." The room was very quiet. "Who?" Maya asked. "We're working on that." The woman looked at her directly. "But it means someone on this base is watching the watchers. Someone who knew to look for anomalies in the personnel query logs." She paused. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Maya said slowly. "It's not. Which means you may have less time than the timeline projected." Maya was quiet for a moment. She looked at the manifest in her hand. 7 discrepancies in half a building. An Eastern Bay she hadn't reached. A pattern that was crystallizing faster than it should have, and now a shadow inside the shadow. Someone watching the investigation without knowing officially that there was an investigation. "I need access to the operations logs," she said. "Not the equipment manifests, the personnel movement logs. Everyone who's been in this building in the last 60 days. That requires a level 3 authorization." "I have a level 3 authorization." The woman looked at her. "Under my actual file," Maya said. "Not the logistics cover." A pause. "Using your actual file," the woman said carefully. We'll change the visibility profile of this assignment. I know. It will confirm to anyone who's paying attention that something beyond a logistics audit is happening here. Someone already knows something is happening, Maya said. They've been watching the query logs for 12 hours. We've already lost the invisibility advantage. She looked at the woman. Right now, the only advantage I have is that they don't know what I know. So I need to move before they figure it out. The woman was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the manifest, the equipment cases, the fluorescent lit bay of indexed materials that held somewhere in its careful disorder the shape of something that had been constructed over months by someone who understood the system well enough to use it against itself. I'll authorize the access, she said finally. You'll have it within the hour. She picked up her coffee cup. Be careful, Collins. I'm always careful, Maya said. I know. The woman looked at her once more. That's why I sent you. She left. Maya stood for a moment in the empty building. Then she picked up the manifest, found her place, and kept moving. The personnel movement logs for Building 4 arrived on a restricted access terminal in the Base Operations Center at 11:47, flagged to Maya's actual clearance, not her cover identity. The moment she entered the access code, she felt the shift. Somewhere in the facility's information architecture, a door had opened that had been closed for 6 weeks. Anyone monitoring that terminal would know that Lieutenant Maya Collins had just accessed something a logistics officer had no business accessing. The clock was running. She pulled up 60 days of movement records and started reading. The first thing she noticed was the frequency. Building 4 was a storage operations facility. It had expected traffic equipment retrieval maintenance inspections, occasional audits. The log should have been sparse. Instead, it was dense with short, irregular visits. Late night, early morning, the hours between shifts when the facility was quietest. Always one person, always brief, always within the same sector of the building, the Eastern Bay. The Eastern Bay she hadn't reached yet. She looked at the badge IDs. Most of them were registered to rotating personnel maintenance contractors support staff. But 3 of them recurred across multiple entries. And those 3 didn't belong to anyone on the facility's official personnel roster. She ran the IDs through the system. 2 came back clean. Registered to subcontractors with legitimate vendor contracts. The 3rd came back with no record. Not flagged, not classified, not restricted, no record. A badge that had accessed this building 11 times in 60 days, including twice in the week before her assignment. Here began attached to an identity that, as far as the Naval Personnel Database was concerned, simply did not exist. Maya sat very still. She understood what a ghost badge meant. She'd used one herself more than once. You built them when you needed access that couldn't be officially documented. When you needed to be somewhere without being there. Someone on this base had built a ghost badge, and they'd built it before she arrived, which meant they hadn't built it because of her. They'd built it because of something else, something in the Eastern Bay. She closed the terminal, logged out, and walked back to Building 4 with the particular kind of stillness that had kept her alive in places considerably more dangerous than a California training facility. The stillness of a person who has just understood the shape of something large and is being very, very careful not to let anyone see it on her face. She reached the Eastern Bay at 1300 hours, moved through it quietly, systematically. The way she'd been trained to move through any environment that might contain something someone had gone to considerable trouble to hide. She wasn't looking for obvious things. She was looking for the texture of difference. The item that sat slightly wrong, the case that had been re-tagged, but not quite perfectly, the gap in a sequence of serial numbers that someone had filled with a number that looked right but wasn't. She found it at 1317, a hard-shell transit case, standard military grade, tagged with a classification marker that corresponded to a joint exercise equipment category. The case number matched the manifest she'd confirmed it earlier in the audit. Everything about it said routine, except the weight. She'd lifted a dozen identical cases in the last 14 hours. They had a particular weight, a particular balance point. This one was different, not dramatically, just slightly. Off by enough that she noticed. She photographed the serial number, photographed the tag, photographed the position of the case in the bay, the equipment surrounding it, the positioning relative to the access aisle. Then she sent the photographs to the same number she'd texted that morning. The response came back in 4 minutes. Serial number is registered to a case that was decommissioned 14 months ago. She read it twice. A case that officially no longer existed, tagged with its old identification number. Sitting in a pre-exercise equipment bay at a facility preparing for a classified joint operation. Someone had put something inside a ghost. Her phone buzzed again. A second message from the same number. We're getting movement on the secondary query. Someone just ran your actual clearance flag through an external lookup. Not internal. External. They know you accessed the terminal. Maya pocketed the phone. She looked at the case. 14 months. That was before Redstone had been designated as the Joint Exercise Host Facility. Before the equipment staging had started. Before anyone officially would have had a reason to think about what might end up in this building. Someone had been planning this for 14 months, and she had found the edge of it in a building she'd been assigned to audit 6 weeks ago by a woman who hadn't told her everything, which meant the woman who sent her already knew there was more here than a logistical discrepancy. She'd have been sent to find exactly this. The question she was only now asking, standing in the eastern bay of Building 4 with her hand 4 inches from a case that shouldn't exist, was how much of what she'd found was the thing she'd been sent to discover, and how much of it was what someone else wanted her to find. She pulled back her hand. She didn't touch the case. She turned around, walked back through the western bay, checked that she had everything she'd photographed logged and transmitted, and pulled out her phone one more time. She called the number directly. No text. No buffer. It rang twice. I found the case, she said. Eastern Bay. And I think we have a problem. A pause. What kind? The woman asked. The kind where I'm not sure anymore whether I'm running this investigation, Maya said, or walking into one. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then, don't move the case. Don't access it. Get out of that building and call me from a clean line. Maya was already walking. The door of Building 4 closed behind her with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. And somewhere on the other side of the facility, in a room Maya didn't know about yet, a monitor displayed the access terminal she'd just used, and a man she hadn't seen yet. Looked at the flag on her actual clearance code, looked at the timestamp, and picked up his own phone. He didn't say hello when the line connected. He said, "She found it." And then after a pause, "Bring it forward, we're out of time." The clean line was a payphone outside the base commissary that Maya had identified on her 3rd day at Redstone. Old habit. You always find the clean lines first before you need them, because when you need them, you never have time to look. She called from it at 1341. The woman answered on the first ring. "Talk to me," she said. "The case has been there for at least 60 days, Maya said. Possibly longer. The movement logs only go back that far on the accessible tier. The badge ID that moved it doesn't exist in the personnel database. Ghost credential, well constructed. Whoever built it understood the facility's access architecture well enough to create something that passed automated verification 11 times without triggering an anomaly flag. That requires insider knowledge. Deep insider knowledge, Maya said. Not just someone with base access. Someone who knows the security infrastructure, the verification intervals, the flag thresholds. She paused. This wasn't built by an outsider who got lucky. This was built by someone who understood exactly how this facility watches itself. A pause on the other end. Not hesitation processing. The external lookup on your clearance flag, the woman said. We traced the origin. It came through a relay node that's registered to a defense contractor with 3 active contracts at Redstone. Which contractor? Meridian Integrated Systems. They handle facility security architecture for the Western Training Corridor. Have for 4 years. Maya was quiet. Security architecture, she said. Yes. So the people who built the system that's supposed to catch unauthorized access are the people we're looking at, the woman said. Yes. Maya leaned against the wall next to the payphone. She looked across the compound, the normal business of a training facility moving through its midday rhythm. People walking with purpose, vehicles, moving between buildings. The whole ordinary machinery of a place that had no idea what was sitting in its eastern equipment bay. "I need the Meridian personnel list for this facility," she said. "Everyone with access credentials issued in the last 18 months. And I need the full security architecture schematic, what they installed, where the verification nodes are, and which ones they have remote access to. Requesting that through official channels will flag the investigation." "I know." Maya thought for a second. "Request it as a routine infrastructure audit. Frame it as pre-exercise security verification. That's standard protocol before a joint operation. It won't look unusual. That buys us maybe 6 hours before someone at Meridian notices the request and understands what it means." "6 hours is enough," Maya said. "If I can get into the security architecture before they know I'm looking at it, I can identify which nodes they've compromised and run a trace on every access event that went through those nodes in the last 60 days. She paused. "That gives us the full picture, not just the case. Everything they moved, everything they touched, everyone they used." Another pause. Longer this time. "Collins," the woman said. "The message that came through, bring it forward. We're out of time. We intercepted it through a secondary monitoring protocol. Whoever sent it knows the primary protocol. They've been operating inside our surveillance architecture." The weight of that settled slowly. "How long?" Maya asked. "We don't know yet. Best estimate, months, possibly longer." The woman's voice was precise, controlled the voice of someone delivering information that she would prefer not to be delivering. "Which means the operation you were sent to investigate may have been running longer than the operation that sent you to investigate it." Maya was quiet. That was the shape she'd felt earlier standing in the eastern bay, with her hand 4 inches from a case that shouldn't exist. The sense that the thing she was looking at was looking back. Not at her specifically, she was a recent addition to a story that had started without her. But the story had been prepared for interruption. It had been built with interruption in mind. "Who else knows I'm here?" Maya asked. "The full list." "You, me, and 2 people above my clearance level." 4 people. "Yes. And the person who sent that intercept knows my clearance flag was accessed," Maya said. "Which tells them someone with my specific credential set is on this base. They may not have a name yet, but they know what they're dealing with. That's our assessment." "Then the 6 hours I mentioned," Maya said. "Assume 4. I'll have the Meridian file to you within 90 minutes. Send it to the restricted terminal in the operations annex, not the Building 4 terminal that's been seen." "Understood." A pause. "And the case?" "Leave it," Maya said. "Don't touch it. Don't move it. Don't send anyone near it. If they're watching, and they are watching any activity around that case, tells them we found it. Right now, the only advantage we have is that they don't know what I know about it. They know you accessed the terminal. They know I ran a query. They don't know what the query returned. There's a difference." Maya straightened up. "Let them think I found a routine discrepancy. Let them think I'm writing a report. Let them think I'm just a logistics officer doing her job." She almost smiled. "I've had 6 weeks of practice," she said. She hung up. Sergeant Marcus Webb found her 20 minutes later. Not by accident, she could tell that immediately. He was waiting near the commissary entrance, positioned in a way that looked casual but had been calculated. He'd anticipated which direction she'd be coming from. She filed that detail away, without changing her expression, and walked toward him at the same pace she'd been walking it all morning. "Lieutenant Collins," he said. "Sergeant Webb." She stopped, looked at him directly. "Something I can help you with." "I was different from last night. Not smaller." Webb wasn't the kind of man who got smaller after a defeat, but recalibrated. Last night, he'd been operating on confidence and exhaustion and the assumptions that came with both. Now he was operating on something more careful. He'd had time to think, time to ask questions, time to come up with a new model of what had happened. "I wanted to apologize," he said. Maya waited. "Formally. For myself and for my team." He held eye contact, which she noted. not a man who looked away from difficult things. What happened in that building was unprofessional. We were out of line. The report reflects the facts, Maya said. Command will handle the review. I know. He paused. I'm not asking you to change the report. Then what are you asking? Howe was quiet for a moment. She watched him choose his words with care, the specific deliberateness of a man who had rehearsed this conversation and was now realizing that the person he was having it with was not responding the way the rehearsal assumed. I asked about your record, he said. This morning, through the intelligence liaison. I know, she said. He blinked, just barely. You know, I know most things that happen on this base that involve my name, she said. She kept her voice pleasant, informational. That's not a criticism, Sergeant. It's just the truth. He looked at her for a long moment. The query came back flagged, 3 flags. I imagine it did. Whoever you are, he said, whatever you're actually doing here, I want you to know that my team didn't understand the situation they were walking into, and I should have been better at reading it. Maya considered him. She thought about what it cost a man like Webb to say that. What it took to walk to a commissary entrance and wait for a woman he'd underestimated and tell her with his whole chest that he'd been wrong. She'd seen men do it before, not many, but the ones who could were in her experience worth something. You're a good soldier, Sergeant, she said. So is your team. Last night was a bad decision, not a bad character. She paused. The review will say what it says, but for what it's worth, I don't carry it past where it ended. Something in Webb's face shifted. Not relief exactly, something more solid than that. Is there anything? He started. There isn't, she said. Not right now. She met his eyes. But stay sharp, and keep your team together. She said it in a way that was just slightly more specific than a general encouragement. Just precise enough that a man like Webb, who had learned to read the texture of communication under pressure, would understand there was more in it than the surface. He looked at her. He understood. Yes, ma'am, he said, for the first time. She walked past him toward the operations annex. Duckung. Captain Blake was at his desk when Maya appeared in his doorway at 1420. He looked up and had the expression of a man who had been waiting not entirely consciously for exactly this. Close the door, she said. He did. She sat down across from him, which was not what he'd expected. He'd expected her to stand to deliver something brief and controlled, and then leave. Instead, she settled into the chair across from his desk, with the deliberateness of someone who had made a decision and was following through on it completely. What I'm about to tell you, she said, goes no further than this room until I say otherwise. That's not a request. Understood, Blake said. No hesitation. You asked me this morning who I am, she said. I'm going to answer that question because I need something from you, and you deserve to know why. Blake was very still. My actual assignment at Redstone has nothing to do with logistics, she said. I was placed here 6 weeks ago as part of an investigation into a suspected infiltration of the facility's security infrastructure. Specifically, an ongoing operation that has been using Redstone's pre-exercise equipment staging as a mechanism for moving materials and information that have no business being on this base. Blake's expression didn't change. He was working hard to make sure of that. How long has this been running? He asked. At minimum 14 months, possibly longer. She looked at him steadily. I found the operational node this morning. A modified transit case in the eastern bay of Building 4. I found the access records that point to the mechanism, a ghost credential built into the facility's security architecture by the contractor that manages it. She paused. Meridian Integrated Systems. Blake leaned back very slowly. Meridian has been our security contractor for 4 years. I know. They designed the access verification system. I know that too. So they can see everything that moves through it, yes, including my query this morning. She watched him process that. Which is why I need something from you that doesn't go through the standard channels. Because the standard channels in this facility run through infrastructure that's been compromised. Blake put both hands flat on the desk. What do you need? The Meridian personnel file is being routed to me in the next 90 minutes, she said. I'll have names, but I need someone who knows this base, who knows the people on it, to look at those names with me and tell me which ones have the access, the knowledge, and the operational opportunity to have run this for 14 months without detection. She held his gaze. You've been at Redstone for 3 years. You know this place. I thought I did, Blake said quietly. You do, she said. You know the people here. That's not nothing. That's exactly what I don't have. Blake was quiet for a moment. She could see him moving through the implications, not just of what she'd told him, but of what it meant for every interaction he'd had at this facility for 3 years. Every conversation, every routine exchange, every piece of information he'd assumed was contained. The 4 Marines last night, he said, were not part of this. I'm confident of that. She said it without softening it, because Blake needed the truth at full strength right now, not a managed version of it. What happened last night was exactly what it looked like: 4 soldiers who made bad decisions under exhaustion and pride. That's a separate matter. But it brought attention, Blake said. To you. Yes. Which may have accelerated their timeline. Yes, she said again. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, the specific, difficult process of a principled person coming to terms with the fact that the world he thought he was operating in was structured differently than he'd believed, and that the restructuring had been happening right next to him for years. I'm in, he said, simply, no performance in it. The Meridian file arrives in 90 minutes, she said. Meet me at the restricted terminal in the operations annex at 1600. Come alone. Tell no one. She stood up. Collins, he said. She stopped. Last night, when I said you were performing calm. He paused. I was wrong about that. You were observing with the information you had, she said. That's all any of us can do. She left. The Meridian file arrived at 1557. Maya had the terminal running before Blake got there, pulling the data into a format she could work through quickly. She heard his footsteps in the corridor at 1601, 1 minute late, which on a base with Meridian's security infrastructure meant he'd taken the long route to avoid the primary corridor cameras. She hadn't told him to do that. He'd figured it out. He was going to be useful. He came in and positioned himself at her shoulder, looking at the screen without touching anything. Good instinct. Meridian has 14 active credentialed personnel assigned to Redstone, she said. Of those, 7 have infrastructure-level access, meaning they can reach the verification nodes, not just interact with the interface layer. She pulled up the access records. I'm looking for someone who has infrastructure access, has been here long enough to know the facility patterns, and whose badge history shows anomalies that match the ghost credentials access windows. Walk me through the names, Blake said. She did. 12 seconds per name, enough for him to place a face, a pattern, a memory. 3 of the 7 he knew well. 2 he recognized. 1 he'd interacted with once. 1 he'd never seen. The one he'd never seen. Harris, she said. Daniel Harris. Infrastructure Systems Specialist. Has been credentialed here for 3 years. I've never seen that man in my life, Blake said. Maya pulled up Harris's access history. Regular. Routine. Monthly maintenance visits, quarterly architecture reviews. All documented. All time-stamped. His last badge swipe was 8 days ago, she said. Eastern Sector, 40-minute visit. Blake stared at the screen. That's Building 4. Eastern Bay specifically. Maya looked at the timestamp. The case was accessed 2 days before I arrived. Someone adjusted something, not the case itself, but something in its immediate area. She pulled another record. Harris's badge was swiped 3 times in the 2 weeks before my assignment here began. He was preparing, Blake said. I was checking, she said. Making sure everything was positioned correctly. She paused. And here's what bothers me. Harris's badge history is clean. Regular. Nothing that would trigger an anomaly flag, which means one of 2 things. Either he's very careful, Blake said, or his real visits don't use his real badge, Maya finished. The ghost credential, the one with no record. She pulled up the ghost badge access log. 11 visits, 11. And every single one of them falls on a day when Daniel Harris's real badge shows him as not on the facility. Blake was very still. So officially he was never here when the ghost badge was used, he said. Perfect alibi, Maya said. If no one puts the two records side by side. Which they wouldn't, Blake said. Because they're in different systems. The personnel badge history and the ghost credential log don't cross-reference automatically. No, Maya said. They require a specific query that connects them. The kind of query a logistics officer doesn't have authorization for. She turned and looked at him. The kind that requires an actual clearance. Blake looked at her. You needed someone with base knowledge, he said slowly. And I needed someone with the clearance to run the right query. Welcome to the investigation, Captain, she said. He looked at the screen for a long moment. At the two records sitting side by side, the perfectly clean official history and the 11 ghost entries that could only belong to the same person if you knew to look for them. What does he have in that case? Blake asked. I don't know yet, Maya said. And I'm not going to open it. Not here. Not without a full evidence protocol and support assets in place. The moment that case is touched without proper procedure, everything in it becomes legally complicated. So what do? We do two things simultaneously, Maya said. First, I identify every node that Harris had access to and run a full trace of what moved through those nodes in the last 14 months. That gives us the full scope of the operation. Second, she closed the Meridian file and opened a different query window. We find out who Harris reports to. He's a contractor. He reports to Meridian. He reports to someone inside Meridian, she said. And that person has a relationship with someone who knew that a Naval Special Warfare operative was being assigned to Redstone and sent an alert about it within 12 hours of my clearance flag being accessed. She looked at Blake. That's not a contractor. That's a network. And somewhere at the top of it is someone with enough institutional access to have built this for 14 months without a single anomaly flag. She started the node trace. The numbers began to populate on the screen. Access events. Timestamp. Materials moved. Files accessed. 14 months of carefully managed invisibility, slowly becoming visible one data point at a time. Then Blake said quietly, "There's something else." She looked at him. "Last week," he said. "Wednesday. I was in the scheduling office working on the joint exercise logistics, the actual exercise, the one you're supposed to be auditing for. The exercise coordinator, Lieutenant Commander Reeves, was in and out. He kept getting calls on his personal cell." Blake paused. "At the time, I didn't think anything of it. But one of the calls I heard him step out into the corridor, and I heard him say, 'The timeline is still viable. Stop calling this number.'" The room was quiet. "The timeline is still viable," Maya repeated. "Same words that were in the text you sent that morning," Blake said. "I saw it on the screen when you sent it. You wrote pattern is confirmed accelerating. And the response from your contact..." He stopped. "I wasn't looking on purpose, but it was on the screen for a second. Accelerating was my word," Maya said slowly. "But timeline is still viable. That was in the intercept we pulled. The message sent after my clearance flag was accessed." She looked at Blake. "Those are the same words Reeves used." "Yes," Blake said. "On Wednesday." "Yes. Before my clearance flag was accessed." Blake looked at her. "Wednesday was 3 days before you used the terminal." Maya turned back to the screen. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves, Exercise Coordinator, the man responsible for the joint exercise logistics, the man whose position gave him visibility into every piece of equipment staged at Redstone, every access schedule, every personnel movement in the weeks leading to the operation. The man who could have told someone months ago exactly when and how to use a pre-exercise staging window to move something through this facility undetected." She added his name to the query. The results came back in 40 seconds. Reeves had direct administrative access to the exercise equipment database, including the manifest system Maya had been auditing. He had approved the original staging timeline. He had signed off on the sector assignments that put the Eastern Bay under reduced inspection priority. And he had a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, off base, No official record of the attendee. He's meeting someone tomorrow, she said. Who? The record shows an external liaison consultation, she said. No name, no organization, just a time and a location. She looked at the address. A hotel 40 minutes from the base. The kind of place that had conference rooms you could book under a corporate name, and nobody looked too carefully at who was actually sitting in them. 10 o'clock. Blake stared at the address. We can't surveil that meeting without assets I don't currently have in position, Maya said. No. She turned away from the screen and was quiet for a moment, running the geometry of it in her head. The time, the location, the people involved. The case in the Eastern Bay. The ghost credential. The intercept. But we don't need to surveil it. We need to let it happen. Blake looked at her. Why? Because if Reeves is meeting someone tomorrow, she said, and that someone gets spooked before the meeting, if they find out we have Harris's name, if they find out we've connected the ghost credential to the case, they'll pull the operation, move the case, burn the evidence, and we get nothing. She met Blake's eyes. But if Reeves walks into that meeting not knowing we're watching him, not the meeting but him, if we have him flagged and his communications monitored from this moment forward, he leads us up the chain, Blake said. He leads us all the way up, Maya said. To whoever is at the top of this. She looked at the screen one more time. The node trace was still running, still populating the full 14-month record of a carefully constructed invisible operation slowly becoming a map. She thought about the case in the Eastern Bay, about what was inside it, about the fact that someone had put it there 14 months ago and tended it with a ghost credential and a perfect cover, and the deep patient confidence of a person who believed they had built something that couldn't be found. She thought about Daniel Harris, about Lieutenant Commander Reeves, about the person neither of them had appeared next to, yet the person whose name wasn't in any of these records because they'd been careful enough to stay one level above where the records ended. I need one more thing from you tonight, she told Blake. Name it. Reeves cannot know we've looked at him, she said. He has to walk into tomorrow morning believing that the investigation is still contained to a logistics discrepancy. He has to believe that I'm a supply officer who found some mismatched serial numbers and is writing a report. She looked at Blake carefully. Which means that for the next 18 hours, everything on this base looks exactly the way it did this morning. And if he tries to access the case, then we move early, she said. But he won't. Not before the meeting. He's not going to do anything that draws attention before the meeting. How do you know? Maya thought about the voice she'd heard on the intercepted transmission. We're out of time. The specific quality of that phrase, not panic, but pressure. The pressure of someone who has been managing a long operation and has just seen its margin begin to compress. Because he's scared, she said. And scared people don't move. They wait. They put their faith in the plan they've been running, and they wait for the meeting where someone tells them what to do next. She closed the terminal. Go home, Captain. Eat dinner. Sleep if you can. She stood. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Blake stood as well. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had arrived at a Tuesday morning thinking it would be a routine day, and was now standing in a room that had rewritten 3 years of what he thought he knew about the place he worked. Collins, he said. She looked at him. Those Marines last night, he said. Webb came to find you today, didn't he? It wasn't quite a question. He did, she said. And? He apologized, she said. Properly. Blake nodded slowly. He's a good soldier. I know, she said. Which is why I'm going to need all 4 of them tomorrow. Blake stared at her. Not for what you're thinking, she said. I don't need operators. I need people who know how to hold a position, keep their mouths shut, and move when I tell them to move. She picked up her bag. Can you make that happen without telling them why? Blake considered it for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, he said. Good. She walked to the door. Tell them it's a facility security exercise. Tell them it starts at 0800. She paused with her hand on the doorframe. And tell Webb, she said, that I said sharp. She walked out. The corridor was quiet. The base was moving into its evening rhythm shift changes dinner traffic, the winding down of a training day. Everything ordinary, everything normal. A facility full of people who had no idea that in the eastern bay of a storage building, a case that officially didn't exist was sitting in the dark waiting for tomorrow. And in a hotel 40 minutes away, someone was preparing a meeting that they believed was still invisible. They were wrong, but they didn't know it yet. And that was the only advantage left that mattered. Maya didn't sleep. She sat in her quarters with the Meridian node trace printed on 3 sheets of paper. She'd printed them at the operations annex terminal before shutting everything down, because paper didn't leave a digital footprint. And she read them the way she'd been trained to read intelligence, not looking for the information that was there, but for the shape of the information that wasn't. 14 months, 47 access events through compromised nodes, 16 distinct material movements logged under falsified manifest entries. A ghost credential used 11 times, always on dates that corresponded to Daniel Harris's official absence from the facility. And at the center of it all, a transit case sitting in the eastern bay of Building 4 that the Naval Supply Database believed had been decommissioned and destroyed over a year ago. The operational discipline was extraordinary. Whoever had designed this understood not just how to exploit a system, but how to make the exploitation look like the system working correctly. Every falsified entry was plausible. Every movement was timed to fall within normal variance. The ghost credential had been constructed so cleanly that even a targeted audit wouldn't have caught it unless the auditor knew exactly what a ghost credential looked like from the inside. Which was the point. You didn't send a logistics officer to find this. You sent someone who had built ghost credentials. Someone who had used them. Someone who understood the architecture of institutional invisibility, because she had lived inside it for years. Maya set the papers down at 0300 and looked at the ceiling. The woman who had sent her here, who had given her a cover identity and a manifest and 6 weeks of patience, had known from the beginning what was inside that building. Not exactly, but enough. Enough to know that a standard investigation wouldn't find it. Enough to know that the only way to pull this thread without snapping it was to put someone inside who looked like she belonged there. The question that had been sitting at the back of Maya's mind since the Eastern Bay, the question she hadn't been able to set down, was how the person who built this had known to build it here, at Redstone. In this particular facility during this particular exercise window, joint exercises got scheduled 18 months out. The facility designation was made by a planning committee that operated at a level above individual base command, which meant that whoever had chosen this location for the operation had access to joint exercise planning data over a year before the exercise was announced publicly. That was not a contractor. That was not even a senior officer at Redstone. That was someone with visibility into the highest levels of operational planning. She looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then she picked up the papers again and looked for the name she hadn't found yet. At 0630, Webb was in the physical training yard when his phone buzzed with a message from Captain Blake. Short. No context. Report to Operations Annex Briefing Room B at 0800. Bring Torres Park Reese. Facility security exercise. Tell no one. Webb read it twice. He thought about the conversation outside the commissary. The way Lieutenant Collins had looked at him, not with the residual heat of someone who'd been wronged, but with the steady calibrated attention of someone who was already 3 steps ahead of the current moment and was choosing deliberately what to say and what to leave unsaid. Stay sharp, and keep your team together. He understood now that those words had not been general. He pulled out his phone and called Torres. Get dressed, he said. We've got something at 0800. What kind of something? Torres asked. The kind you don't ask questions about, Webb said. And wake Reese. Tell him to leave the attitude in his bunk. He hung up. Maya was already in Briefing Room B when they arrived. She was standing at the front of the room with the particular stillness that Webb had been trying to categorize since the previous night, and now understood looking at her in daylight with full context was not patience and was not performance. It was economy. She moved exactly as much as she needed to, and not one fraction more. It was the most efficient way he'd ever seen a human being occupy a space. Blake was in the corner. He'd been there when Webb arrived, and whatever his role was in this, it was clearly secondary to hers. The 4 Marines filed in. Reese was last. He looked at Maya and looked away and then looked back because you couldn't quite look away from her once you'd looked. Webb understood that too now. Maya waited until the door closed. "What I tell you in the next 10 minutes, she said, stays in this room. That's not a security briefing. That's a professional courtesy, because you're going to be asked to act on information you don't have full context for, and I want you to understand that the lack of context is intentional and not personal." She paused. "Questions about that?" Nobody spoke. "Good. There is an active security situation on this base. It has been running for longer than any of you have been assigned here. This morning, it reaches a point where I need eyes on a specific set of locations, and I need those eyes to be people who know how to stand in one place without looking like they're standing in one place." She looked at each of them in turn. "You're those people. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am," Webb said. The other 3 followed a half-second behind. Reese said it with the same flatness as the others, which was Maya noted something. "Here's what you're going to do," she said. "Torres, you're in the corridor outside the exercise coordinator's office. Building 3 North Wing. You're doing a routine equipment check on the emergency lighting system in that corridor. You've been assigned to it. If anyone asks you have a work order, Captain Blake will provide it. You are not watching the office. You are not watching anyone who goes into or comes out of the office. You are doing your job." She paused. "But if Lieutenant Commander Reeves leaves that office at any point before 0930, you send a text to this number." She held up a piece of paper with a number written on it. 1 word. Moving. Torres took a photo of the number with his phone. "Park. You're at the vehicle access point on the east side of the compound. You're logging incoming contractor vehicles. You have a clipboard. You're thorough and you're slow about it. Any Meridian Integrated Systems vehicle that arrives on this base this morning, you log the time and you text me the plate." She looked at him. "You know the Meridian trucks. Gray panels, blue stripe," Park said. "They're here twice a month. This morning they may be here off schedule," Maya said. "That's what I need to know." Park nodded. "Reese." She looked at him steadily. "You're my most important position, and also my most complicated one, so I need you to hear this precisely." Reese met her eyes. "I'm listening." "Building 4 Eastern Bay. You're going to be in the Western Bay, running a continuation of my equipment audit. You have the manifest. Blake will give you the relevant pages. You work slowly. You're thorough. You do not go into the Eastern Bay under any circumstances." She held his gaze. "If anyone enters the Eastern Bay, anyone, you do not intervene. You do not approach. You text me the word contact and you continue your audit. You do not look up. You do not acknowledge that you saw anything." Reese was quiet for a moment. "And if they try to remove something? Text me moving and the direction they head when they leave," she said. "Then continue your audit." "That's it, I just watch." "That's it," she said. "And I need you to understand that doing exactly that, only that without any additional initiative, is the most operationally critical thing you can do this morning." She paused. "Can you do that?" Something moved in Reese's face. The specific expression of a man who understood for the first time completely the gap between physical capability and operational discipline. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And he meant it. "Webb," she said. "You're with me." Webb looked at her. "Where?" "We have a meeting to attend," she said. "One we weren't invited to." The drive to the hotel took 38 minutes. Maya drove. Webb sat in the passenger seat of a civilian vehicle that Blake had requisitioned through a channel that wouldn't show up on the base vehicle log, and he didn't ask questions, which was the right instinct. She'd told him what she needed on the way to the parking structure. A second set of eyes on the lobby, positioned differently from hers, able to identify military personnel or contractors out of uniform in a way that she couldn't do alone without being noticed. "You've done surveillance work?" she asked. "One tour as an intelligence support asset in Djibouti," he said. "I know what it looks like when someone doesn't want to be seen having a conversation." "Good," she said. You're not trying to hear what's said. You're identifying everyone in that lobby and any conference room corridor you can access without drawing attention, and you're building me a picture of who's there and how they know each other." She glanced at him. Demeanor positioning, who defers to whom, the things a camera doesn't catch. Got it. And Webb. She kept her eyes on the road. If anything goes wrong, if someone makes you, if the situation changes faster than we can manage, you do not engage. You leave. You get to a public area, and you call Blake. "What about you?" "I can take care of myself," she said. He almost smiled. "I know that." They arrived at 0923. The meeting was scheduled for 10. Maya went in through the lobby at 0926, civilian clothes. Her hair down. The first time anyone at Redstone had seen her without the regulation bun, and she moved through the space with the relaxed ease of a conference hotel guest who had been here before and knew exactly where she was going. She found a seat in the lobby lounge with clear sightlines to the elevator bank, the main conference room corridor, and the street entrance. Webb came in 3 minutes later through the restaurant entrance and took a position at the bar. At 09441, Lieutenant Commander Reeves arrived. Maya recognized him immediately. She'd studied his personnel photo last night, committed it to the specific memory that her training had made nearly photographic. He was 51, medium build, the kind of military bearing that didn't entirely leave a person even in civilian clothes. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too formal for the setting, which told her he was nervous. When people were nervous, they overdressed. It was an unconscious reach for authority. He went directly to the conference room corridor without stopping at the desk. He knew where he was going. He'd been here before. Maya texted the woman's number. Subject arrived. The response came back in 40 seconds. Monitoring. Do not follow him into the corridor. She didn't. She sat in the lobby and watched the elevator bank. At 0957, 2 men came down from the upper floors. Civilian clothes, both of them. Mid-50s. One of them carried a leather portfolio. They moved with the particular purposeful unhurry of people who were accustomed to making other people wait and had stopped feeling the need to apologize for it. Maya photographed both of them. Discreetly. Twice each. She sent the photos. The response took 90 seconds. Longer than before. Then, second man from the left. Do you have a clear shot of his face? She adjusted her angle and took 3 more. Sent them. 45 seconds. Then Collins. Pull back. Get out of the lobby. Right now. She stood immediately, unhurried, left a coffee she hadn't touched on the table and walked toward the restaurant entrance. She passed Webb without looking at him. He caught it and stood dropping a bill on the bar. They were in the parking structure in under 2 minutes. What happened? Webb asked. Maya was looking at her phone. The second man, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something in it that hadn't been there before. The one with the portfolio. Who is he? She looked up. His name is Garrett Caldwell, she said. He's a senior program director at the Defense Advanced Contracts Office. She paused. He's also the man who approved Redstone's designation as the host facility for the joint exercise. 18 months ago. Webb stared at her. He picked the location. He picked the location, she said. And then he helped build an operation to exploit it. She looked at the phone again. He's not a contractor, Webb. He's not Meridian. He's the reason Meridian was hired for Redstone 4 years ago. She put the phone in her pocket. He's the top of the chain. Webb was quiet for a moment. Processing. The specific silence of a man whose understanding of a situation has just expanded dramatically and uncomfortably. What's in the case? He asked. I don't know yet, she said. But whatever it is, it was worth building a 14-month operation for. Worth compromising a defense contractor, placing a ghost credential in a secured facility, and using a joint exercise as cover. She looked at him. Caldwell has visibility into classified operational planning across 6 training commands. If he's been moving information, if the case contains what I think it might. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Reese. 1 word. Still. Then her phone buzzed again. Moving. East exit. She looked at Webb. Someone's pulling the case, she said. She was already moving. The drive back to Redstone took 22 minutes. Maya drove at exactly the speed limit, which was the hardest thing she'd done all morning. She called Blake on the way. Short, precise. Someone entered the eastern bay in the last 30 minutes, she said. They're moving the case out the east exit. I need you to lock down the east vehicle gate right now. Maintenance emergency waterline rupture. Anything I need that gate closed. I'll need authorization from Blake. Her voice had an edge in it that she didn't bother to soften. Close the gate. I'll handle the authorization. Close it now. A pause. She heard him exhale. Done, he said. Gates closed. She hung up. What do you need from me? Webb asked. When we get to the facility, she said, you go directly to Building 4. Don't run. Walk. You're doing your job. You locate Reese and you stand with him in the western bay, and you do not move until I tell you to. And you? I'm going to the east exit, she said. Whoever is moving that case doesn't know the gate is closed yet, which means they're going to come out the east exit with a piece of equipment that doesn't officially exist and find a maintenance closure in their way. She paused. And they're going to have to make a decision about what to do next. What if they go back into the building? They won't, she said. They're already committed. They got a signal from the hotel from Caldwell telling them to move now. You don't abort a committed extraction in a secured facility. You get out. She turned into the facility access road. They're going out the east exit. The only question is whether they think they're going out clean or whether they know we're there. Which is it? I don't know yet, she said. Which is why I need you in that building and not near me. She dropped him at the main entrance and took the service road toward the east side of the compound. She parked where the vehicle wouldn't be visible from the east exit and walked the last 100 meters. The gate was closed. Blake had done it cleanly. There was an orange maintenance marker and a barrier arm down the exact appearance of a routine closure. Nothing to suggest it had been done deliberately. Nothing to suggest it had been done 3 minutes ago. She positioned herself where she could see the exit without being visible from it. And she waited. She was good at waiting. It was one of the specific skills that the particular life she'd chosen had made almost physical, the ability to be still inside a moving situation, to let time pass without pushing against it, to stay ready without burning the readiness on anticipation. 40 seconds. A minute. Then the east exit door opened. A man she'd never seen before came through it. Medium-height contractor's work clothes, a Meridian badge clipped to his jacket. He was pulling a hand truck with the transit case strapped to it. He moved efficiently without looking around, the practiced movement of someone who had done this before and believed entirely that this extraction was going to go exactly as planned. He reached the vehicle gate, stopped, looked at the maintenance barrier, looked at it for 2 seconds. 3. The specific stillness of a man whose internal calculation is running fast and arriving at conclusions he doesn't like. He turned. Maya was standing 15 feet behind him. She had her credentials in her hand, not the logistics cover. Her actual credentials. The real ones with the actual designation, the actual clearance level, the actual identification that her cover had been built to conceal for 6 weeks, and that she was now holding open in front of her with the same quiet steadiness she brought to everything. The man looked at the credentials. Then he looked at her face. He understood immediately what both of them meant. He let go of the hand truck. She watched his hands and said clearly, "Don't." He didn't. "Step away from the equipment," she said. "Hands visible." He did that too. "On the ground," she said. "Hands behind your head." He went down. She came forward, kept him in her peripheral vision, and looked at the case strapped to the hand truck, the serial number she'd photographed yesterday. The decommissioned case with the wrong weight. The thing that someone had tended for 14 months with extraordinary patience and discipline, and the deep settled confidence of a person who believed they had built something impenetrable. She put her hand on the case. Her phone buzzed. Blake. Text message. Reeves just tried to leave through the north gate. Security held him. He's asking for a lawyer. She read it once. Then she texted the woman's number. I have the case. I have one in custody at the east exit. Reeves is contained at the North Gate. Caldwell is at the Meridian Hotel meeting. The response came back in 30 seconds. Assets moving. Do not release custody. Federal jurisdiction invoked as of this timestamp. Well done, Collins. She pocketed the phone. The man on the ground was looking up at her. He had the expression of someone who had run a very sophisticated operation and found at the end of it that the thing he'd been most careful about, the thing he'd built his entire plan around, was the thing that had been watching him from the inside. How? He asked. Maya looked at him. You built a perfect system, she said. You just put it in the wrong building. He stared at her. The audit was already underway before you moved in, she said. Not the logistics audit, the real one. She looked at him steadily. We've been in this facility since before you started positioning the case. He closed his eyes. She watched him absorb it. The specific punishing understanding that the operation he'd given 14 months of his life to had not failed because of a mistake, or a leak, or a moment of bad luck. It had failed because someone had been there first, invisible inside the machinery he thought he controlled, waiting. She looked at the case one more time. Then she looked up at the clear California morning, the sky already bright, the base going about its business around her, the ordinary Tuesday, continuing in every direction around a very small, very still center. In the hotel 40 minutes away, Garrett Caldwell was in a conference room with a leather portfolio waiting for a meeting that was already over. In the north corridor of Building 3, Lieutenant Commander Reeves was sitting in a security room asking for a lawyer he was going to need. In the eastern bay of Building 4, the hand truck was empty and the ground was quiet, and Corporal Reese was still running his equipment audit because she'd told him to, and he was the kind of soldier who did exactly what he was told, and then found sometimes that it was enough. And at the east exit gate of Redstone Maritime Training Facility, Lieutenant Maya Collins stood in the morning light with 14 months of someone else's careful work at her feet, and felt not triumph, not relief, not the particular satisfaction of having been right all along, but the specific grounded quiet of a job that had been done completely. The next thing would start soon enough. It always did. For right now, she just let the morning be what it was. The man on the ground told them his name was Kevin Stroud. He said it the way people say things when the calculation is already complete, and they've decided that the only remaining variable they can control is how they conduct themselves in the next few hours. Not cooperative exactly. Not broken. Just arrived. At the place where the math had run out, and the only thing left was the accounting. Maya kept him positioned and called Blake. Short sentences. East exit. 1 in custody. Case secured. Need transport and a holding room that isn't on the main facility log. Blake had it arranged in 11 minutes, which told her something about what kind of officer he was under pressure. Not the kind who asked questions that burned time. The kind who executed and debriefed later. 2 base security officers, she didn't recognize Blake's people, clearly pulled from a duty rotation that didn't intersect with Meridian's access records, arrived with a vehicle, and took Stroud without ceremony. He went without resistance. He didn't look at the case again. He looked at Maya once briefly, with the expression of a man filing something away for a conversation that hadn't happened yet, and then he looked at the ground and kept his eyes there until the vehicle door closed. Maya watched it pull away. Then she turned to the case. The evidence protocol she'd referenced to Blake was real. You didn't open a contested piece of material in the field without documentation chain of custody. The full procedural architecture that turned a physical object into something a prosecutor could use. She knew that. She'd lived that. She'd watched cases get thrown because someone had opened something at the wrong moment in the wrong place with the wrong witnesses present. But she also knew something else. The woman who had sent her here, who had authorized the Level 3 access, who had said, "I'll have the Meridian file to you within 90 minutes, with the flat confidence of someone who had already arranged it, had known what was in this case before Maya arrived at Redstone 6 weeks ago. Had known well enough to send someone with the specific skill set required to find it without being seen finding it. Which meant the decision about what to do with the case, how to open it, who would be present, what would happen afterward, was not Maya's to make. She photographed the case from 6 angles. Photographed the hand truck, the position of the east exit gate, the maintenance marker Blake had placed. She sent everything to the woman's number with a single line of text, ready for federal transfer. Awaiting your instruction. The response came in 2 minutes. Federal team arriving at 1400. Do not move the case. Secure the immediate area. Good work. It was 10:38. She had almost 4 hours. She sat down on a concrete barrier 20 feet from the case and waited. She was good at waiting. She was less good. She was discovering at the particular kind of waiting that came after the operational part was over, and the thinking part, which she'd been managing with extraordinary discipline for the last 18 hours, finally had room to expand. Because something was bothering her. Something had been bothering her since she'd photographed the man with the leather portfolio in the hotel lobby, and the woman had said, "Pull back, get out of the lobby right now." The speed of that response, the certainty in it, the fact that 90 seconds of photo analysis had produced an identification so complete that the next instruction was immediate evacuation. You didn't build that response time without having done the analysis before. Garrett Caldwell's photo had been recognized not because Maya had found him. It had been recognized because someone already knew who he was, already knew he was connected to this, already knew his face. She sat with that thought for a while. Then her phone buzzed. Web. Text. Reese is still running the audit. Torres and Park are clear. What do you need? She typed back. Send Torres and Park back to their regular duties. Tell them they did good. Send Reese to me at the east exit. 3 minutes later, Reese appeared. He walked with the careful, deliberate pace of someone who had been told to act normal and was putting genuine effort into it. He stopped near her and looked at the case, and looked at the empty hand truck, and looked at Maya. You got it, he said. We got it, she said. I was quiet. He looked at the case one more time, not with curiosity exactly, but with the specific look of a man who understood that the thing in front of him represented a category of problem that was much larger than it appeared. The man who was moving it, he said. In custody, she said. Reeves, North Gate. Reese nodded. He looked at his hands, then back at her. When I texted you, when I saw him come in. He paused. I almost went in there. I know, she said. I know, she said again. Not critically, just acknowledging it. The pull of action when you've trained for action. The specific discipline required to hold back when every instinct says move. But you didn't. No, he said. That's what mattered, she said. Not almost. What you actually did. He looked at her with the expression of someone reassessing a fundamental assumption, not about her exactly, but about the relationship between capability and restraint. About which one was harder. They sat in silence for a moment. The base moved around them. What's in it? Reese asked. I'll know this afternoon, she said. Is it bad? She looked at him. Yes, she said. I think it's very bad. He nodded slowly. Then I'm glad we got it. Me too, she said. The federal team arrived at 13:47. 13 minutes early, which told Maya they'd been staged nearby, not 40 minutes away, not on the road when she'd texted. Close. Waiting for the signal that the case was secure. She'd been set up to succeed. The infrastructure had been in place before she'd found anything. The federal jurisdiction, the transfer protocols, the evidence team. It had been assembled around her operation while she was running it, the way a net is assembled around something that's already in motion. She stood up when the team lead reached her. A man named Carver, federal credentials, the specific bearing of someone who had done this exact thing. The retrieval of evidence from a location where someone else had done the hard work of finding it many times before and had developed a practiced, respectful efficiency for it. Lieutenant Collins, he said. Agent Carver. She handed him the documentation she'd built. Chain of custody starts here. I photographed the case in situ, logged the initial custody transfer, and I have the access records that establish how the case was moved to this location and by whom. She paused. The individual who was transporting it at the time of interdiction is in a holding room in the base operations building. His name is Kevin Stroud. He's credentialed to Meridian Integrated Systems, and I believe he's the person behind the ghost credential that appears in the Building 4 access logs. Carver reviewed her documentation without rushing it. She watched him read and saw in the small movements of his expression that the documentation was thorough. It was more than thorough. It was the kind of evidence record that had been built by someone who understood exactly what a federal prosecution required and had anticipated each requirement while actively managing an interdiction. "You did this in the field," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I did it while the situation was live," she said. "Yes." He looked at her briefly, the same look she'd been getting since the previous night, the look of a person recalibrating. And then he turned to his team, and they began the formal transfer of the case, with the methodical care of people for whom procedure was not bureaucracy, but protection. "Agent Carver," she said. "The case." He turned. "I need to know what's in it," she said. He held her gaze. "That's above. My clearance level is not the issue," she said. "The question is whether you've been authorized to brief me." She paused. "Because the woman who sent me here told me she'd have the file to me within 90 minutes when I asked for the Meridian personnel records. She didn't tell me she'd tell me what's in the case, which means either she decided I didn't need to know, or she was waiting to see if I found it before deciding." Maya looked at him steadily. "I found it, so I'm asking you." Carver was quiet for a long moment. "The case contains documentation," he said finally. "Classified operational planning materials. Specifically access schedules, personnel rotations, and facility infrastructure schematics for 6 training commands in the Western Corridor." He paused. "Including the command that will be hosting the joint exercise in 11 days. Maya absorbed that. Someone was going to use the exercise as cover, she said. Not just for moving the case. The exercise itself was the delivery mechanism, Carver said. The joint operation brings personnel and equipment from 6 commands into a single location under a classified operational umbrella. Perfect cover for moving people and information that aren't supposed to be in the same place at the same time. He looked at her. If the contents of that case had reached their intended destination before the exercise began, the exercise would have been compromised before it started, Maya said. Worse, Carver said. The personnel and facilities exposed in those documents would have been vulnerable for the duration. 18 days of a classified multi-command operation running with a security breach baked in at the foundation. He paused. We're talking about potential access to signals intelligence, special operations planning, and the movement of assets that are currently active in theaters I can't name in this location. The scale of it settled over her slowly. Not just a Redstone problem. Not just one case in one eastern bay. 14 months of construction designed to produce a single catastrophic window 11 days away. Caldwell, she said, is being taken into federal custody at this moment, Carver said. His travel was flagged the moment your photograph was confirmed. He didn't make it out of the hotel. And the organization behind him, Carver looked at her. That's the next conversation, which I'm not authorized to have with you here. He paused. But Lieutenant Collins, the woman who sent you, is going to want to speak with you directly, this afternoon. She'll call when the transfer is complete. He turned back to his team. Maya watched them work. The methodical, unhurried professionalism of people who had been doing this for a long time and understood that the way you handled the evidence was inseparable from the justice it was supposed to produce. She thought about 11 days, about 6 training commands, about the personnel whose names were in that case, people who had been compromised without knowing it, who had been waking up and doing their jobs and trusting that the systems around them were intact, who would find out this afternoon that someone had been inside those systems for over a year. She thought about Garrett Caldwell in a hotel conference room with a leather portfolio waiting for a meeting that arrived in the form of federal agents instead of contractors. She thought about Kevin Stroud's face when he'd turned and found her standing 15 feet behind him. The specific quality of that moment, the way understanding had moved across his features, in the precise order of someone whose entire architecture of assumption had just been dismantled. She thought more than she'd expected to about the 4 Marines. Blake found her at 1512, sitting in the operations annex with a coffee she'd gotten from the cafeteria and was drinking with the concentration of someone who needed the warmth more than the caffeine. He sat down across from her without ceremony. Reeves is being formally interviewed by federal agents right now, he said. He asked for a lawyer 3 times. They have a lawyer for him. He's talking anyway. Blake paused. Apparently, when they showed him the scope of what they had, the node traced the access records, the Meridian files, Caldwell in custody. He stopped asking for the lawyer to make things stop and started asking for the lawyer to manage the conversation. He looked at her. He's cooperating. Good, Maya said. The ghost credential, Blake said. Stroud built it using Meridian's infrastructure access, but Reeves gave him the specific verification thresholds, the exact flag levels that would trigger an anomaly alert, and the exact parameters needed to stay below them. Blake's voice was careful and controlled, and slightly tight beneath that. Reeves knew this facility's security architecture in that detail because he'd been at Redstone for 4 years. He'd been part of the original security infrastructure review when Meridian was brought on. He paused. He was in the room when the system was designed. He helped design the vulnerability, Maya said. He didn't design it intentionally, at the time. Blake looked at the table. But when Caldwell approached him 2 years ago, based on what he's telling them, he knew exactly what could be exploited and how. 2 years. The timeline extended backward again past the 14 months she'd been tracing. Caldwell had been building this relationship for 2 years. The Meridian contract had been at Redstone for 4. She thought about the layers, how far back the original planning went. How many decisions that had seemed routine and administrative had been in some cases pieces of a larger architecture being assembled, one approved contract at a time. How are your people? She asked. Blake looked up. The question had clearly surprised him. He'd expected operational debrief, not that. Torres is fine, he said. Park is fine. Reese is. He paused. Reese is quiet. He's processing. He looked at her. Webb hasn't said much either. He came back from the hotel, and he's been at his desk since then. Writing, I think. Which is not something I've seen Webb do voluntarily in 3 years. Maya thought about Webb in the passenger seat, watching the road go by at exactly the speed limit, not asking questions. About Reese on the ground in the western bay of Building 4, running an equipment audit that was the most operationally critical thing he'd done all day by doing nothing. About Torres outside a corridor with a work order about lighting fixtures, standing in exactly one place for 90 minutes because he'd been told to. They did well, she said. They did, Blake agreed. All of them. He paused. Collins last night, the incident report. She looked at him. The review board is convening next week, he said. With everything that's happened today, the original incident, what happened in Building 4 between your team and their team, it's going to look different to whoever reads it now. He was careful. I don't know what that means procedurally, but I wanted you to know that I'm going to make sure the record reflects their conduct today. It should, she said. What they did this morning, the positioning, the restraint, the execution, that wasn't nothing. That was serious operational discipline under ambiguous circumstances. He looked at her. You gave them that. You told them exactly what to do and they did it. They already knew how to do it, she said. I just told them it was the right moment. Blake was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. Last night, in my office, when you told me. He paused. You didn't have to do that. You could have run the whole thing without bringing me in. You had the clearance. You had the access. I needed someone who knew the facility, she said. You could have gotten that another way. She looked at him. Yes, she said. I could have. He waited. You saw something on that security monitor at 2 in the morning, she said. Most people in that building at that hour would have looked at the screen, seen 4 people, and 1 person done the math and called it in as a potential assault situation. Standard protocol. She paused. You didn't do that. You looked at her, at me, and you said she's choosing where they stand. That's not standard protocol. That's someone who understands what they're actually seeing. Blake was quiet. I needed someone who understood what they were actually seeing, she said. And you were already there. He absorbed that for a moment. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his expression changed, the specific change of someone receiving information they'd been prepared for, but that still landed with weight. "It's the base commander," he said. "Answer it," she said. He did. She listened to his side of it, short responses. "Yes, sir, understood. I'll relay that," and watched his face. He hung up after 45 seconds. "Base commander has been briefed by federal agents," he said. "He's been told that a classified investigation concluded successfully on this base today, and that full information will be provided at a command briefing at 0800 tomorrow." He looked at her. "He's been told that a naval officer embedded at this facility was the primary investigative asset. Does he know who?" "He knows your name," Blake said. "Your actual file." He paused. "His words as relayed to me were, 'Tell her to come see me before she leaves this base.'" Maya looked at her coffee. "When are you leaving?" Blake asked. "When the case is fully transferred and the federal handoff is complete," she said. "Tonight, probably." "And after that?" She looked at him with the expression that he'd started over the last 24 hours to understand as her version of a smile. Present. Specific. Not warm exactly, but something adjacent to it. "That," she said, "is classified." She went to see Webb at 16:30. He was in a small office adjacent to the briefing room, not his assigned space, just a room with a desk and a chair and a window that caught the afternoon light. He was doing exactly what Blake had said. Writing, not a report. She could tell by the way he was sitting forward, elbows on the desk pen, moving in a way that was too deliberate for a form. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." She came in and stood, rather than sat, looked at him for a moment. "I want to tell you something," she said. "And I want you to understand that I'm telling you as a professional, not as the person who was involved in what happened between our teams 2 nights ago. That's a separate thing." "Understood," he said. His pen was down. "What you did this morning," she said. "In the vehicle, in the hotel, the decisions you made and didn't make." She paused. "That was the work, not the building, not the 34 seconds. What you did in that lobby, the patience, the position, the discipline, that's harder. And you did it right." Webb looked at her, not with the complicated defensiveness of the previous night, with something much simpler. "Thank you," he said. "The review board next week," she said. "I'm going to submit an addendum to my incident report. It will reflect the conduct of your team today in full detail." She looked at him steadily. "It will not undo what's already been submitted, but it will sit beside it in the record. And records matter." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't have to do that." "No," she said. "I didn't." He looked at his desk, at the paper he'd been writing on. "My team," he said. "They've been asking me what happened today, what we were actually part of." "What are you telling them?" "That we did our jobs," he said. "That somebody needed people who could hold a position and keep their heads, and we were those people today." He looked up. "Is that right?" "That's exactly right," she said. He nodded slowly. "Sergeant," she said, and something in her voice made him sit up slightly. "The things you assumed walking into Building 4 2 nights ago, about who belonged there, about what competence looks like, about who gets to take up space in a room." She paused. "I'm not telling you this to revisit that. I'm telling you because you're good. You're genuinely good. And good people who carry wrong assumptions are more dangerous than mediocre people who do, because they act on those assumptions with confidence." She held his gaze. "Don't waste what you're capable of on a model of the world that isn't accurate." Webb looked at her for a long moment. "I hear you," he said. "Good." She turned to leave. "Collins." He said it without the rank, then caught himself. "Lieutenant." She stopped. "What you said to Reese this morning," he said. "About the most operationally critical thing being to do exactly what he was told, and nothing more." He paused. "He told me he almost went in there, almost intervened when Stroud entered the bay." "I know," she said. "He said what stopped him was that you'd looked at him and asked if he could do exactly that." Webb paused. "He said it wasn't the order that stopped him. It was that you'd asked him directly, like it was a real question." She was quiet. "Was it?" Webb asked. She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. It was a real question. Why him specifically? She looked at Webb for a moment. Because Reese was the one most likely to move, she said. The one whose instincts run hottest. And I needed to know whether his discipline could match his instincts before I put him in the position. She paused. It could. So I did. Webb absorbed that. The specific quality of being understood accurately, not flattered, not managed, but seen moved across his face. That's what you do, he said. Isn't it? Read people. Among other things, she said. She left. The woman called at 18:15. Maya took it outside, standing in the same area near the east vehicle gate where she'd stood that morning with the case at her feet, and the morning light coming in flat and clear over the facility. Collins, the woman said. Everything transferred, Maya said. Carver's team has the case. Stroud is in federal custody. Reeves is cooperating. Caldwell is contained. I know, the woman said. I've been on with Carver for the last hour. A pause. The case contents are exactly what we feared. Possibly worse. There are materials in there that indicate Caldwell had been running this particular channel for longer than 14 months. We're finding reference documents that go back nearly 3 years. 3 years. Longer than the Meridian contract at Redstone. Longer than Reeves's assignment here. The architecture kept extending backward one level at a time, each level revealing something underneath it. He was building infrastructure, Maya said. Not just operations. He was building the capacity to run operations like this one indefinitely. That's exactly what he was doing, the woman said. Redstone wasn't the only facility. It was the most advanced implementation, but there are 2 others we're now looking at. She paused. You're going to be briefed fully tomorrow morning. I'm flying in tonight. You're coming here. There's a command briefing at 0800 and you need to be in the room for it, the woman said. Not as the logistics officer, as yourself. Another pause. It's time to close the cover. Maya looked at the gate. At the maintenance marker Blake had placed this morning, still there, slightly crooked now in the afternoon light. The base commander wants to see me, she said. I know. I'll be with you when you go. The woman paused. Collins. What you built here in 6 weeks, the access, the trust, the operational relationships, you did that without a single support asset on the ground. Blake Webb, his team. You recruited them in real time under a live operation. They recruited themselves, Maya said. I just didn't get out of the way. That's exactly the skill, the woman said. And something in her voice shifted slightly, not softer exactly, but more direct. The quality of a person saying the thing that's been true for a while and finding the right moment for it. You know there's going to be a conversation about your next assignment. I assumed. It won't be logistics, the woman said. I know. And it won't be a cover, the woman said. Not this kind. The next operation requires a different profile. Maya thought about what that meant. About the files that would be reclassified, and the cover that would be formally closed, and the 6 weeks of being a logistics officer at a facility in California, becoming officially a completed chapter that would be stamped and archived and filed somewhere with 3 access flags above it. And the next chapter, starting wherever the woman decided to send her, under whatever name, in whatever building, running whatever thread, needed someone who could stand in a room without being seen and read everything that was happening in it. When? She asked. 2 weeks, the woman said. Maybe 3. After you've testified and the federal case is filed. She paused. Take some time, Collins. You've been running hard. I'm fine, Maya said. I know you are, the woman said. Take some time anyway. They hung up. Maya stood at the east gate for a little while longer. The sun was lower now, the light going orange and sideways across the facility. Somewhere across the compound, dinner was happening in the cafeteria. Normal things. The base doing what bases do in the hours after the hard parts are over. She thought about Reese running his equipment audit without looking up. About Torres standing in a corridor with a work order about lighting. About Blake closing a vehicle gate on 11 minutes notice because she'd asked him to, and he'd decided she was worth trusting. About Webb in that small office writing. About the case already in a federal evidence room somewhere carrying 3 years of someone's patient, careful, catastrophic work toward whatever accounting was coming for it. She thought about Garrett Caldwell, who had chosen a facility and a contractor and a window and a ghost credential and 14 months of extraordinary discipline, and had been wrong about exactly one thing. He'd assumed the audit was routine. She picked up her bag. She had a base commander to see. Rear Admiral Thomas Greer had commanded 3 ships and 2 shore installations before Redstone, and in that time, he had developed a particular understanding of what it felt like when something significant had happened on his watch without his knowledge. It was a specific kind of weight. Not embarrassment exactly. A man who'd survived the things Greer had survived was past embarrassment, but something more structural. The sensation of discovering that the building you'd been managing had a room in it you didn't know about, and that room had been occupied for years. He was a large man physically, and he sat behind his desk, the way large men sometimes sit, taking up the space without performing it, simply present in the way that comes from decades of being the person others oriented toward when things went uncertain. He had read the preliminary brief that federal agents had placed in front of him at 1700. He had read it twice. He had not asked questions during the reading, because he'd learned a long time ago that the most useful thing you could do with a document that surprised you was finish it completely before you spoke. When Maya came in at 1835, he was on his 3rd read. She knocked once and entered. The woman was with her, the woman Maya had been calling in her head simply the woman for 6 weeks, because no name had been offered, and she hadn't asked, and whose actual title she now understood from Carver's documentation was Deputy Director of Naval Special Operations Intelligence. A title that explained, among other things, why her personnel verification queries came back with 3 access flags and a silence that felt like a wall. Her name was Patricia Hensley. Greer looked up. He looked at Hensley. First, they knew each other clearly from the specific quality of the nod they exchanged. And then he looked at Maya. He looked at her for a long moment. Maya stood at ease and didn't say anything. She'd learned early that the people worth talking to were the ones who needed time to look, and that giving them that time cost nothing. "Lieutenant Collins," Greer said finally. "Admiral." "Sit down," he said. "Both of you." They sat. Hensley with the ease of someone returning to a familiar posture, Maya with the precise economy that was simply how she occupied every chair in every room. Greer set the brief down. "I've been at Redstone for 2 years," he said. "In those 2 years, I've had Meridian on contract reeves in the exercise coordinator's office and a storage building in the eastern sector that I reviewed quarterly and found unremarkable every time." He paused. "I want to understand how that happened. Not defensively. I want to understand it because I'm responsible for this facility, and what was built here was built under my command." "The construction was designed specifically to survive your reviews," Maya said. "Not by exploiting your blind spots, by exploiting the architecture of the system you were using to conduct them. The Meridian security infrastructure was built to catch anomalies above certain thresholds. Stroud and Reeves calibrated every movement to stay below those thresholds." She paused. "You weren't deceived because you weren't paying attention. You were deceived because the deception was designed by people who understood exactly what you were looking for." Greer looked at her. "That's a generous interpretation." "It's an accurate one," she said. "The operation that was running here required Reeves's inside knowledge and Caldwell's institutional access and Meridian's infrastructure position and 14 months of patient execution. This was not something that could have been caught by standard review." She met his eyes directly. "Which is why it required a non-standard approach to find it." He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you actually been a Naval Special Warfare operator?" he asked. 8 years, she said. "And in those 8 years, how many assignments like this one?" She considered the question. Not evasively, actually considered it, which he appreciated. 4 with similar architecture, she said. Cover identity embedded access, long-duration operational patience. Each one different in the specific, similar in the shape. "What made this one harder?" he asked. She thought about it. "The people," she said. And something in her expression shifted barely, but he caught it. "The people here are good. which makes the deception worse because it used the institution's trust in its own people as the mechanism. She paused. Reeves wasn't a bad officer for 20 years, and then suddenly, a traitor. He was a good officer who was found at a moment of vulnerability and cultivated over 2 years by someone who understood exactly how to make a wrong path feel like a manageable choice. She looked at Greer. That's harder to see coming than a bad actor, and it's harder to live with afterward for the people who trusted him. Greer absorbed that. He looked at Hensley. The command briefing tomorrow, he said. 0800, Hensley said. The full senior staff. We'll cover the scope of the operation, the assets compromised, and the remediation protocol. She paused. There will also be a second briefing restricted to command level about the 2 additional facilities we're now investigating. Greer's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. 2 others. Yes, Hensley said. Redstone was the most advanced. But the architecture Caldwell was building wasn't designed for a single operation. It was designed to be replicated. He was building a network, Greer said. He built most of one, Hensley said. Collins found it before it was complete. Greer looked at Maya again. This time the look had a different quality. Not assessment he'd finished that quickly, she could tell. Something more like the specific recognition that passes between people who understand at a professional level what a particular kind of work actually costs. The incident 2 nights ago, he said. The 4 Marines. Maya was quiet. The review board is next week, he said. I've read the incident report, the original, and I'm aware that an addendum was submitted this afternoon. He looked at her. I want to hear it from you, not the paperwork. From you. She met his eyes. The 4 men made poor decisions under conditions that are worth understanding, she said carefully. They'd finished a hard rotation. Their judgment was impaired by exhaustion and by assumptions that their training had never given them a reason to question. She paused. They were wrong. The review should reflect that, and it will. But their conduct today, the way they executed under ambiguous circumstances, holding positions, and maintaining discipline, when every instinct was probably telling them to move, that's the same quality that makes them good soldiers. It just went in the wrong direction 2 nights ago. You trust them, Greer said. Not a question. I trust the quality in them that I saw today, she said. Yes. Greer nodded once, slowly, the kind of nod that meant a decision had been made, though not yet spoken. Is there anything you need from me before the briefing tomorrow? He asked. No, Maya said. Everything I need is already in motion. She paused. But Admiral, the remediation for the Meridian infrastructure. The verification nodes Stroud compromised. When your team goes in to audit and rebuild the security architecture. You're going to tell me not to use Meridian, he said. I'm going to tell you to have someone who wasn't part of the original build do the audit, she said. Not because everyone at Meridian is compromised. Most of them aren't. But because Stroud built this by knowing the architecture from the inside. The audit needs to be done by someone who can look at that architecture as if they're seeing it for the first time. She paused. Fresh eyes catch things that institutional familiarity misses. Greer looked at her for a moment. Like a logistics officer running a pre-exercise inventory audit. Exactly like that, she said. He almost smiled. It was a very small movement, but it was there. Dismissed, Lieutenant, he said. And Collins. She'd started to rise. She stilled. Well done. She looked at him. Thank you, Admiral. She left. The command briefing at 0800 the next morning had 23 people in it. Senior staff department heads, the base legal officer, 2 federal agents from Carver's team, and Patricia Hensley at the front of the room, with the particular authority of someone who had done nothing in her career to cultivate visible authority and consequently radiated it from every surface. Maya sat to Hensley's right, not in her logistics cover uniform. In her actual designation, Naval Special Warfare, the correct insignia, the correct rank, display, the specific visual language of what she actually was, rather than what she'd spent 6 weeks pretending to be. It was the first time most of the people in the room were seeing her correctly, and she felt the shift in the room as they processed it. The recalibration. The quiet collective reassessment of everything they thought they'd known about the logistics officer who'd been running inventory audits for 6 weeks and apparently doing something else entirely at the same time. Hensley briefed for 40 minutes. Comprehensive. Precise. The operational timeline from Caldwell's initial recruitment of Reeves 2 years ago, through the Ghost Credentials construction, through the case's positioning, through the previous day's interdiction. She presented it the way she'd built it, methodically, without drama, letting the facts carry the weight, because the facts were more than sufficient. When she reached the section on the investigation itself, the asset deployment, the cover identity, the specific approach, she said without particular emphasis. The investigative asset embedded at this facility identified the operational node, traced the access records established. The Ghost Credential connection identified Reeves as the internal contact and coordinated the simultaneous interdiction of the case and all 3 associated personnel within a 14-hour operational window. The room was quiet. One of the department heads, a commander named Vasquez, whom Maya had seen in the cafeteria most mornings and who had never given any indication that he'd registered her existence, raised his hand. "The investigative asset," he said. "Who?" "Lieutenant Maya Collins," Hensley said. "Sitting to my right. Naval Special Warfare. She's been assigned to this facility for 6 weeks." 23 people looked at Maya. She looked back at them with the expression she'd worn in Building 4 2 nights ago and every day since, present steady, giving away exactly nothing. "She was your logistics officer," Vasquez said. He said it the way people say things that they've assembled correctly but don't quite believe yet. "She was our investigative asset," Hensley said. "The logistics assignment was her cover." Vasquez looked at Maya. "You were here the whole time." "I was," she said. "You ran inventory audits," he said. "Among other things," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at the front of the room and then back at her and said quietly, and with what seemed like genuine feeling, "I am very glad you were." Several people in the room, Maya noticed, nodded. Blake found her after the briefing. In the corridor, which was where people found her, she was always moving between one location and another, never stationary, in a way that said, "Catch me here." He fell into step beside her. "How are you?" he asked. It was the first time anyone had asked her that in the last 36 hours, and the simplicity of it landed differently than she'd expected. "I'm good," she said. And then, because it was Blake and he'd earned the fuller version, tired, but good. "When are you leaving?" "This afternoon," she said. "After I finish the formal debrief with Hensley's team, 3 or 4 hours." He was quiet for a moment. They walked. "I've been trying to figure out," he said, "what to do with the last 6 weeks, like retroactively. Every conversation I had with the logistics officer, I thought you were. Every assumption." He paused. "It's a strange feeling." "The conversations were real," she said. "The person you were talking to was real. The cover was the job description, not the person doing it." He thought about that. "You didn't tell me anything false." "I didn't tell you everything," she said. "But nothing I told you was false." "Including breakfast," he said. "When you said you were Lieutenant Maya Collins, Naval Logistics." "My name is Maya Collins," she said. "I am a lieutenant. I was assigned to this facility, all accurate." She glanced at him. The logistics part was the only fiction. He almost laughed. It was a small sound surprised out of him. "You're a very precise person." "I have to be," she said. They walked a little further. "The 4 Marines are going to get a formal commendation," he said, "for yesterday's conduct. Greer signed it this morning." He paused. "The review board will still address the incident, but the record will have both things in it." "Good," she said. "That's right." "Webb asked me to tell you something," Blake said. She looked at him. He said, and I'm quoting because he was specific, he said, "Tell her that I understand now what she meant about the difference between strength and the understanding of it." Blake paused. "He said you'd know what it referred to." Maya was quiet for a moment. She thought about the last thing she'd said to them in Building 4 2 nights ago, when the 4 Marines were looking at her with the specific expression of people who had just encountered something that didn't fit their model of the world. Respect is not given because someone is afraid of you. It's earned by how you treat people when you think nobody is watching. She hadn't planned to say it. It had been true, so she'd said it. "Tell him I heard it," she said, "and that I mean it." Blake nodded. They reached a junction in the corridor, and he stopped. "It was good to work with you, Collins," he said, simply, without performance. She stopped and turned and looked at him with the expression that was her version of warmth, not absent, but contained, the way a very bright light is contained in a small fixture and throws more illumination than a larger one diffusing it. "You too, Captain," she said. She kept walking. The debrief with Hensley's team took 2 hours and 40 minutes. 3 people from Carver's unit, a legal officer from the federal prosecution team, and Hensley herself. They went through everything in sequence, every decision, every access event, every conversation that had contributed to the operational picture. Maya answered in full. No hedging, no compression. When you debriefed properly, you gave the complete record because the people using it needed the complete record, not your editorial judgment about what mattered. Near the end, one of Carver's people, a woman named Ellison, who had said very little for 2 hours but listened with extraordinary attention, asked a question that Maya hadn't been asked yet. "The incident on the first night," Ellison said. "The confrontation with the 4 Marines. Did that affect the operation?" Maya considered it honestly. "It changed the visibility profile," she said. 4 Marines submitted a personnel query on me the following morning. That query was logged and accessed by Stroud's contact within 12 hours, which told them someone with my clearance level was on this base. It compressed the timeline. In a way that nearly compromised the operation. In a way that accelerated it, Maya said. The acceleration was manageable because I'd already located the case and established the access records before they moved. She paused. But if the timeline had compressed by another 24 hours, if Stroud had moved the case the night before, rather than the morning I was ready, it would have been a different outcome. So the incident was a liability, Ellison said. Maya thought about Reese in the Western Bay, running his audit without looking up. About Webb in the passenger seat watching the road without asking why they were driving at exactly the speed limit. About Torres standing in a corridor for 90 minutes with a clipboard doing nothing more and nothing less than what she'd asked him to do. The incident, she said carefully, produced 4 people who were highly motivated to conduct themselves with exceptional discipline when I needed exceptional discipline from them. She met Ellison's eyes. I wouldn't call that purely a liability. Ellison looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote something in her notes and moved to the next question. Hensley said nothing during this exchange. But Maya, from the corner of her eye, saw the very small movement at the corner of Hensley's mouth that was as close as Patricia Hensley came to a visible reaction to anything. At 15:30. Maya stood in the parking area outside the base housing unit where she'd lived for 6 weeks and looked at the building with the specific attention you give to a place you're about to stop seeing. She wasn't sentimental about it. Sentiment wasn't something she carried much of, not because she was incapable of it, but because the life she'd chosen didn't give it much room. You put down roots too deep, and then someone needed you somewhere else, and you had to pull them up, and that cost something you needed for the next place. But she looked because she was someone who paid attention. She thought about the first morning here. The way she'd stood in the administrative office being processed as a logistics specialist, and the duty officer had barely glanced at her before pointing her toward her housing assignment. How completely she'd disappeared into the institutional furniture of the place before she'd spoken a single word. She thought about the inventory audits. The actual one's hours of careful cross-referencing that had been both cover and genuine work, because she'd taken the role seriously from the first day. Because you always took the role seriously, that was the only way it worked. She'd found the 2 discrepancies she'd mentioned in the first incident report, and they were real discrepancies unrelated to the operation that had needed to be flagged for command review. She thought about 6 weeks of cafeteria breakfasts and corridor conversations, and the specific rhythm of a place that was running its own complicated life around her while she ran a different one inside it. And she thought, as she always thought at the end of an assignment, about the distance between who she'd appeared to be and who she actually was, and about the fact that the distance over 6 weeks had been so complete that even people who were smart enough to sense something was different had only been able to articulate it as a feeling, not a fact. That was the work. That was what the work looked like when it was done right. Her phone buzzed. Hensley. Text message. Wheels up 1700 from the North Airfield. Car is waiting. Don't be late. She picked up her bag. She walked across the parking area toward the North Airfield Road, and then almost without deciding to, she took a detour through the equipment yard that ran along the south side of Building 4. She stopped outside the east exit, the door that Stroud had come through that morning, with his hand truck and his absolute certainty that his operation was still intact. The maintenance marker was gone. Someone had retrieved it after the federal team finished their documentation. The gate was open again. Everything was back to its ordinary appearance, the unremarkable infrastructure of a functioning facility, resuming its unremarkable function. You'd never know, looking at it, that anything had happened here. That was also the work. She looked at the door for a moment. Then she looked up at the California sky, clear, bright, the particular kind of afternoon blue that made distances look shorter than they were. And she thought about Garrett Caldwell in a federal holding facility with his leather portfolio and his 3 years of patient construction reduced to evidence in a case file. About Kevin Stroud, who'd spent 14 months building ghost credentials and moving invisible cases and trusting that the invisibility was permanent. About Reeves, who'd spent 2 years believing that a wrong choice could remain a manageable secret if you were careful enough. None of them had been wrong about the importance of invisibility. They'd just been wrong about who was invisible. She turned and walked to the waiting car. The airfield was small, 2 runways and a transit hangar, and the particular flat, windswept quality of a place designed for function rather than impression. The car dropped her at the hangar at 16:48. Hensley was already there, standing with a coffee she'd clearly had for a while and a phone she'd clearly been on since before Maya arrived. She looked up when Maya appeared and clicked off the call. "Debrief notes are filed," Hensley said. "The federal case opens formally on Monday. You'll be called to testify probably in 6 to 8 weeks. The legal team will contact you directly." "Understood," Maya said. "The 2 additional facilities," Hensley said. "We'll begin positioning assets within the month." Different approach. Redstone was a long-duration embedded operation. These will be shorter, more aggressive, because Caldwell's network knows it's been compromised and will move faster. "Who are you sending?" Hensley looked at her. "That's the conversation I mentioned last night." She paused. "Not you. Not immediately. You're going to rest, testify, and then we're going to talk about what comes next." She held Maya's gaze. "But I want you to think about something while you're resting." "What?" "You told me the incident with the Marines produced people who were motivated to perform with exceptional discipline," Hensley said. "You told Ellison that it wasn't purely a liability." "Yes," Maya said. "I want you to think about what that means at scale," Hensley said. "Not 4 Marines, not 1 facility. The capacity to walk into a room full of people who've made assumptions and in 48 hours turn those assumptions into something useful." She paused. "That's a different skill set from what you've been running. It's not embedded intelligence work. It's leadership." She held Maya's gaze. "The next operation doesn't need an invisible logistics officer. It needs someone who can build a team out of the raw material on the ground, no setup, no support, and run it clean." She paused. "That's a harder job than what you just did." Maya was quiet for a moment. "You're not asking me to make a decision right now," she said. "I'm asking you to think," Hensley said, "while you're resting." "I'll think," Maya said. The aircraft was a small military transport. Efficient, unglamorous, exactly suited to its purpose. They boarded at 16:57. The crew was 2 people who did their jobs without looking at their passengers, which was exactly the kind of crew you wanted on this kind of flight. Maya sat by the window, looked out at the runway as the transport started moving, the hangar sliding past, the edge of the compound, the flat California terrain opening up as the aircraft lifted the facility, becoming a pattern of buildings and roads, and then smaller, and then a reference point among other reference points, and then something she was flying away from. She thought about Webb's message through Blake. I understand now what she meant about the difference between strength and the understanding of it. 8 words that took 2 nights and 1 operational morning to earn. She thought about Reese's hands on the clipboard in the Western Bay. Steady running an audit. Nobody would remember, while the most important thing he could have done was exactly nothing. She thought about Blake at 0200, on a security monitor, watching a woman who wasn't stepping back and understanding before anyone had explained it to him that the person he was watching was not the one who needed protecting. She thought about Hensley's question. Leadership versus invisibility. The capacity to build something out of the people in a room versus the capacity to become invisible to those people. 2 different skills. Both necessary. The question was which one the next operation needed. She already knew the answer. She'd known it since Webb sat down across from her with his apology that was real, and his attempt to understand something that had genuinely surprised him. And she'd looked at him and thought, this is someone worth building with. Not 4 Marines who'd made a bad call. 4 people who, when it counted, had done exactly what was asked of them, with exactly the discipline the situation required, on no setup and no full context, and nothing more than her word that it mattered. That was what you could build with. That was what leadership looked like when it wasn't performing itself. The transport leveled out above the cloud layer. The window filled with that specific high-altitude light, clean, sourceless, the kind that doesn't throw shadows because it comes from everywhere at once. Maya thought about Caldwell. About the 3 years he'd spent building infrastructure for an operation he'd believed was invisible. About the extraordinary patience and discipline of it, the careful calibration, the ghost credentials, the decommissioned case, the 14 months of access events that never once tripped an anomaly flag. He'd built it to last. He'd built it to survive scrutiny. He'd built it with the absolute certainty of someone who had looked at every possible angle of failure and addressed each one. He had simply never considered, not once in 3 years, that the scrutiny might come from inside the thing he was hiding it in. That was the only miscalculation he'd made, and it was the one that ended everything. Maya leaned back in her seat. She closed her eyes. In 11 days, the joint exercise at Redstone Maritime Training Facility would run as scheduled. The equipment would stage, the personnel would arrive, the operational protocols would execute. The 6 training commands that Caldwell's operation had been designed to compromise would function with the security they'd always believed they had. Because someone had been in the right building at the right time, with the right eyes open. Not because she'd announced herself. Not because she'd demanded to be seen. Not because she'd made the room understand in advance what they were dealing with. But because she'd done her work completely in the dark, undercover, in the patient and invisible and unacknowledged way that real work is almost always done, and when the moment required her to be visible, she was there. And that was the difference between someone who carried authority and someone who had earned it. Between someone who needed the room to know their name and someone who understood that the name didn't matter. Between someone whose power lived in the announcement of it and someone whose power was simply present, simply functional, simply real, whether anyone in the room was looking or not. Maya Collins had never needed anyone to know who she was. She had only ever needed to know herself, and that in the end was the thing that no one could take from her. No cover could conceal, and no assumption could reach the bedrock certainty of a person who had looked at herself completely, chosen her work with her eyes open, and carried it without flinching through every room that had ever tried to make her feel like she didn't belong there. She belonged everywhere she chose to stand, and she always would.